woven into the
and that's a watermark is called that because it's actually in the screen and it's impressed into the paper when you pull it out of the water bath with the slurry, so it leaves that watermark. All paper had a watermark going back to the 1500s, so don't worry. Modern watermarks tend to look modern, but that's a period practice too. So that's the paper maker's signature basically on there. So that is definitely done at the time.
Right.
So basically, laid paper is where we start out.
So what's modern paper?
Modern paper is called wove paper. And you can see the difference when you hold it up to the light. There's no chains, there's no ladders.
There's a watermark.
Exactly. This starts out actually in the late 18th century with an English paper maker who develops a screen that has such fine holes in it that it doesn't leave an impression on the finished paper. And in fact, you see one, but it does look like woven cloth, so they call it wove paper. The first person to use it was John Baskerville, who printed a book on this wove paper in 1757, but it was so expensive that only printers used it for the longest time. After the turn of the 19th century, technology came along. A pair of Frenchmen invents a mass produced paper milling machine, and wove paper suddenly explodes. So in 1807 or 8, you start seeing it in the United States. By 1810, it's gaining, and by the 1840s, it's pretty much taken over from laid paper. Now that being said, laid and wove were used side by side right up to the end of the 19th century, but after it became popular, after about 1820 or so, wove paper is well more popular than the old laid paper is, and really kind of takes over as the premier writing surface.
What about the idea of the cost of paper? Today we buy giant reams of paper for nearly nothing.
Exactly. And at the time, paper was coming down, but it was still expensive. Keep in mind, this is not made with wood pulp. One of the reasons modern paper is so cheap, we cut down trees to do this. And as sad as that is, that does make for cheap paper. Their stuff was much finer in quality, and it used a different manufacturing process. They used linen rags. In fact, we like to brag about being green today and recycling. They would do the same thing. When a shirt or a shift wore out, you sold it to the rag man who took it down to the paper mill and sold it to him, and that man turned it into slurry for paper. So you could literally, be writing on your former shirt, soon afterward. But that is an expensive process, takes a long time to do, and it makes the paper consequently more expensive. So when you bought paper in those days, you want to make sure you get the most out of it. So for example, right here, you brought along this wonderful little bill, which was for some kind of town thing, 2 pounds, 2 shillings. But what's fascinating about it is look how small it is. This started off life as a much larger sheet of paper, and it was cut to a much smaller piece because they don't need that much. They're just trying to get this is a receipt. They're just trying to get the most information on there and get it back into the hands of the guy who needs it. So if you don't need a full sheet, you'll cut it down, you'll shape it to match, and you'll try to save as much as possible because this can be very expensive at the time.
So they're not wasting the paper, they're not wasting the used clothing, everything gets reused.
Pretty much.
It's a great story. Yeah. So, they had these papers. It turns out that there was sometimes at different times paper prep. They had that. Today we get out the paper, whoosh, it's ready to be used.
Exactly.
What about in the 18th century?
Well, in the 18th century, paper was often as good as the person who made it, just like the quills, just like the inks. So you do get complaints in people talking about the poor quality of their paper, and their ink is feathering or running, and that's the thing where it bleeds into the paper, or that it's so greasy that you can't write on it, it's just beating up. So there were tricks to get around that. You could still use them today. The way around that is use some of this gum sandric powder, and the best way to use it is to crush it very fine, put it in a little tiny ball of cloth, and then just pounce it all over the paper. In fact, that's the process called pouncing. And you pounce it all over the paper, rub it in real good, and what that does is it tightens up and slickens all the fibers of the paper, and that makes it easier to write on. You can do that with greasy paper as well. Another way to do it is burnishing. You can take a bone folder and burnish it real hard, and it accomplishes the same process. So these are ways of compressing the fibers of the paper to make it hold the ink a little better, make the ink run off the pen a little easier. And that was a more common problem in the 18th century than today. Today, if you're using modern commercial paper, it's got manufactured with tolerances at the factory, so it shouldn't give you that problem. But if you do, in the odd chance, encounter that problem, just use the 18th century solution and pounce the paper.
Well, let's talk about paper sizes. Today, we use 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. That's how it comes. Sometimes we get legal size. In Europe, they use different sizes. What about in the 18th century?
Exactly. And this all comes down to, even today, what was the size of the master piece of paper coming out of the mill? They made them in huge sheets and then cut them down to size.
You didn't want to waste it.
Exactly. So as it turns out, when you cut them down into the smallest quadrant, basically, of that big sheet, you get a sheet about 8 by 10 inches. And that's the standard that you often see in the short notes and what they called billets in those days, little tiny informal documents. They're on a paper just roughly smaller than a modern piece of 8.5 by 11 North American paper. This can easily be cut down to the size, and 8 by 10 or thereabouts, and you can use it that way. That's convenient because you can buy this in office stores by the ream, still with the laid finish, the whole 9 yards. The problem is, most formal correspondence wasn't written on this kind of paper.
Okay.
This is too small. Military documents, bills,
this one.
they're often it's the same process, the one size up. This is a more legal size document right here. This is that you brought in, a beautiful document here, which is for the Brigantine Hannah, a bill for her outfitting at a port, 1797 there. You can see the size, bigger than this one, but you can also see it's a little narrower
and longer.
So this is probably around 8 by 13 or thereabouts, and that is their version of legal size. You see this size a lot in military documents, business transactions, legal documents are a lot of that size, and I think that's where the term comes from because they used it for so long. So that's the next size up. That you can still get at stationery stores. The problem is formal correspondence was usually written on what they called bifolium paper, and that's like this. It looks like the 8.5 by 11 until I actually open it up. It's actually a booklet. And so what you want to do here is you start out with a page probably roughly equivalent to the modern 11 by 17 and then fold it in half. And what you would do with this is you'd write your intro, you're right here in the body of the paper, body of your letter, signature goes here, back page is blank. And that way you fold that up, and that's the outside of your envelope when you're done. So most formal letters, and I mean letters written to loved ones, letters written to important people, had to be on this format. That can be tricky because it's hard to find letter stock that size, but there is a quick go around for people who want to just get started and looking for a relatively cheap version. Go down to your art store or a craft store, and a lot of times they'll have charcoal paper. Charcoal paper is laid art paper. You want to look for charcoal because charcoal is laid finish. It's also relatively light. It's writing weight basically, and it comes in all sorts of sizes, including about I guess this one's about it's close to 11 by 17, but you can cut that down to size, fold that over, and there you got
kind of make your own version.
A pad of maybe 25-30 for a relatively cheap amount of money. So that's a good way to get started if you want to get into this and you don't want to go to the trouble of ordering it special and have the mill cut it and everything like that. So there's ways around it. There's ways to replicate the look. One other tip, if you're looking for paper, remember their paper was linen content. Almost impossible to find today. I did the math one time. I actually found a mill in France that still makes it, linen content, rag paper. It would have cost almost as much as the payment on a house to even import 5 sheets, so I just said forget that. I'm glad to know it's out there, but that's for professionals, not me. What you can do, though, is get the equivalent cotton content. The more cotton that's in it, the more expensive it's going to be. But you can get it anywhere from 25 to 100%. And if you get 100% cotton, it is almost as close as you're going to see to actual original 18th century paper that I've handled in my career. So.
They didn't just work on blank sheets, right?
Exactly. Letters aren't the only part of writing with this. Everything was recorded in these days. I like to tell the kids that, when I do these workshops, that when you think of Shakespeare's works or something like Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, all of that was recorded on paper with a quill pen originally. And they start off with little things like this. So blank books, if you want to do journaling, if you want to keep notes of things. Almost everybody had a little blank book they carried in their pocket.
Right. And we should today.
Exactly.
I know I do.
We have an iPhone today, but back in the old days, that was their phone, was this little book. They called them waste books because a lot of times the cheap ones that they sold at the stationers were cut down from waste paper and they were meant to be wasted. So little cheap books like it. Now this one's much nicer than a cheap book, but something like this is perfect for journaling and things like that.
So leather, marbled paper.
Yeah. So all of these would be how the records were kept. So if you're aboard a ship, for example, you're going to be keeping logbooks, you're going to be keeping navigational journals, you're going to be keeping medical journals. All that's being kept in these little blank books that were made in these bookbinder shops, sold to the public, and carried to sea.
Right. And here's one that's a commonplace book.
A commonplace book, yeah. Those were kept by great minds, basically, so you could organize your thoughts. So again, you've got them where they've got tables of contents, and you've got the A, B, C, D. All that's designed for you to find, if you had a passage, a quote, something like that, you could organize it according to your own system,
right,
and then go look it up.
And then go back and find where it's at instead of going, I think it's in here someplace.
Exactly.
So yeah, so fascinating. So many great little nuances with paper. Who would have thought paper was such a complicated little process, but it's so much different today. We take paper for granted. It was very, very important in the 18th century. We've covered a lot of writing, making quills, the kind of paper, the kind of ink you need, but sealing, letter sealing is always a fun thing to talk about. So get us into this letter sealing.
Well, once you've written your letter, obviously you want to seal it, and of course in those days they didn't have envelopes yet. Well, they did, but they were expensive and most people didn't use them. So generally you use the back of your letter.
So you actually use your letter as the envelope?
Yeah, the back of the letter. So for example, if you're writing on this side, then leave this side blank, and then this becomes where you're going to put your address and fold it up. So the envelope starts from that, and when it's done, you're going to see something that looks a lot like this, with the seal on one side and the address put on the other.
Right.
So, I've just got here a collection of different seals, wafer stamps, which is a little bit different, different methods that they used in period to close their correspondence to send it in the mail.
So the seal material itself, it's called sealing wax, right? But it is not wax.
It is not wax. It started as wax. In the Middle Ages, it was a mixture of beeswax and other different things. Olive oil was in it, and a colorant. But that was a very primitive kind of wax, and it didn't work very well. It becomes what we call sealing wax in the 16th century, when shellac is starting to be imported to Western Europe. And then you start getting these sticks, kind of like these ones here, which are pure, they're shellac, rosin, a colorant, binder, different materials. That gives you a wax that's very, very hard and brittle. And that's also kind of a built-in security feature. So if your correspondence is being read and somebody's broken the seal, you'll be aware of it when you see that. So that's the original kind of sealing wax. And that's still sold today as traditional wax, or they have different names for it. But if you want to seal your letter in period manner, that's what you're going to look for. Modern waxes tend to be that bright red right there, which is fairly close. It's not great. The difference between modern and the old style stuff is that this is, they sometimes market this as mailable or flexible wax.
Right.
That's important if you actually want to send your stuff through the mail. The U.S. Postal Service is no longer equipped to handle sealing wax. If you use this shellac base, the traditional wax, and you send that to the mail, you may very well jam the machines and cause all sorts of problems at the post office.
Yeah, if you want to do that, put your letter that you've sealed inside of a padded envelope and ship it that way, and it'll actually get there intact, and not destroyed and destroy their equipment at the same time.
Exactly. There is some etiquette to wax if you're going to be doing it. It came in different colors, so blues and greens were used for informal correspondence.
Okay.
The most formal color of all was red. So if you're going to be trying to replicate, say, a military or a
government document,
document, legal, red is really, and really in most formal correspondence, red is the go-to. What you want to avoid is black. Black is a bad sign. This is actually shorthand. If you saw a seal with a black border, or a black seal and a black border on your letter, it's shorthand for you need to sit down before you open this, because that usually means
bad news
in the family, bad news, funeral.
It's mourning. Okay.
Yes. So that tradition goes back into the 17th century, and so most people wouldn't use. I've actually seen an extant letter in which the person apologizes for the shock and saying, "I'm sorry I used black wax, but I didn't have anything available." So the poor person who opened it must have been horrified.
Sure. So, how about other methods of sealing? Well, while we're here with these sealing, we've got sealing wax stamps here. Right?
Exactly, and as you can tell, I'm a bit of a fanatic about collecting them.
Sure.
And everything. These are different sizes, different types. Many of the seals at the time, these are called desk seals, and this is the sort of thing a lady or a gentleman would have on their desk so they could seal formal correspondence. But they came in different sizes, but there's other types as well, and this is, I'm just absolutely drooling over, I just have to say. This is one of my favorite things in your catalog. It's a signet ring, so that's a very typical thing for a lady or a gentleman to have their coat of arms or some symbol there. And you can use it that way. Most people turn it off, and if you've ever used one, you find that out quickly. It's
unless you want to burn your hand.
Exactly. But this one, in fact, is particular. It's a memento mori. What is the story on that?
Well, memento mori is that 17th and 18th century movement that means remember your mortality. So remember you're going to die someday, so you shouldn't just live life just any old way, right? And so that particular design, I think, is off a Jamestown find.
That's what I thought, and it's a wonderful reproduction. There's problems with sealing wax.
Right.
It can be messy, it can be dangerous in cases. You've got to be careful with it. So even in that time period, the late 18th, early 19th century, people were looking to come up with alternatives. And one of the ones they came up with was the sealing wafer. Now this is a little bit obscure. You're not going to find a lot on the market. Wafers became the quick, easy substitute for sealing wax. And really it's just a tiny little round dough disc. And what they would do normally in those days is put it under their tongue and write their letter, and that would soften it while they were going, while they were writing. Then you fold your letter, and at the last minute, pull it out, stick it under the flap, and close it down.
Right.
And you're going to close it with what they called a wafer seal, and you can see these.
Right, so it's completely different than these with a special design. They all have a grid type pattern.
Exactly. That grid is characteristic, and in fact, I did one earlier where you can see it. Right there, that is the characteristic stamp you see in a lot of early 19th century letters. That indicates it was sealed with a wafer seal. Now, this was used a lot. I mean, it was so much more convenient than the wax stamp. A lot of times, especially in this climate, I'm in the American South, which means I've actually seen an etiquette book that says you want to use wafer seals rather than wax because it'll melt in and stick together in the postman's pouch in this climate.
Wow.
I've actually had that experience ordering it through the mail. It'll stick together. So the wafer's very common, but also keep in mind the etiquette. There's a lot to keep in mind when you're writing this. If you're of a certain station, if you're of a gentleman class or something, and you receive this in the mail, that's a bit uncouth. And that was, through that whole period, you see complaints about this because it came out of somebody's mouth a lot of times. So that is considered, you don't send that to somebody of important station. You never send formal correspondence this way. But for a letter between friends, a letter to your grocer or something like that, the wafer seal is so much easier and more convenient than that.
And this wafer is... it's like a tiny ship's biscuit. It's just a very, very simple flour, very, very thin. So I want to see a letter get sealed, but before we do that, let's talk about the folding, because we have to have a letter folded before we seal. Is there special things to folding? Are there different kinds of folds?
Well, good news and bad news. Part of the romance, I think, of this whole process is the letter fold, and in the early days, the 15, 16, 1700s, it was a very individual process. And there were several different types of folds, some of them very intricate, some of them with built-in mechanisms to keep them from being pried into, that sort of thing. Sadly, for our time period, we're talking concentrating on the late 18th, early 19th century, and by the second second half of the 18th century, letter folding was pretty boring. It had gone down to a simple, what looks like very much a modern envelope today. So a lot of those intricate letter folds have been lost over time, and they're just now being resurrected. One of my favorite channels on YouTube is there's an MIT professor named Jana D'Ambrosio, and she runs a channel called Letter Locking, and that's what she's doing is actually reconstructing these intricate ways of folding they used in the pre-modern, or the early modern era.
We'll make sure to put a link down in the description section.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in that era, and I highly recommend you look at her channel because she's a scholar. She's done the research, probably the foremost expert on that process living today. So what we're going to demonstrate today is really just a simple one sheet letter fold. So if you're writing on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or something similar, this is the sort of thing that almost everybody used to fold their correspondence in the late 18th, early 19th century. You can do this without, but one thing that makes your life a lot easier is invest in a bone folder if you want to do this a lot. This helps you make your creases very sharp and helps you get into tight corners, and you'll see that as
can be helpful.
Yeah. Exactly. So with this sort of letter fold, the simplest one, what you're going to do is first start with, remember, all this is your writing up here. This is where your letter is.
Back
the sheet's
side,
blank for the address. So you're going to start with the writing side up, and you're going to fold in your sides. Try to make them as neat as possible as you go down. So there's one there.
So you're folding in about 1.25 inches.
About 1.25 inches. It isn't exact science, and it doesn't have to be centered either, because the entire package is going to be
a rectangular.
Yeah, a rectangular anyway. So leave a little space in the center a lot of times, especially with a letter this size, and that should be enough. Doesn't have to meet in the center. And again, none of this is set in stone. Every letter, it seems, is folded differently by a different correspondence. So that's your first fold right there. So you got your two sides folded in. Now, starting from the bottom of the letter, you start folding it up. And again, you rough it out. That's probably about a quarter of the way up. And this is where the bone folder really pays for itself, because once you get up here, you're going to tend to get crinkly and crunchy down in the corners.
Yeah.
Well, if you put your bone folder in there, pull down,
Get a nice
that's going to neaten everything. Now, here's a little pro tip for everybody. At this point, stop using this bone folder to crease until you're done, because you're going to have to adjust it a little bit as you go up. So to keep it neat, you're going to just take that right on that line there.
And keep going one more.
One more time.
Okay.
And that's going to give you the top flap of your envelope.
Okay.
So flatten that pretty good. And then the top flap comes down. And now it's starting to really look like an envelope.
Sure.
The last trick is, you don't want to just, you can do it this way. I've seen examples done this way, but it's very neat, it's very ugly. It's
right,
not
the
very,
corners want to kick up and everything.
And it doesn't hold everything secure.
Right.
So this can break loose in the mail or something like that. What they would do generally is take this bottom part here, there's your top flap, tuck one corner in, and this takes a little adjustment, tuck the other corner in. Now that it's done that way, now come back in with your bone folder and make sure it's nice and crisp and flat, and there is your folded letter.
And it doesn't easily come loose. So.
Right, and so it holds that shut. Plus, the other advantage of this is once you put the seal here, it's only going through one layer of paper, so if you cut that loose, you won't damage, hopefully, the writing underneath, and you won't make the letter illegible.
Sure.
So that's the simplest and most common way of folding a letter in the late 18th and early 19th century.
So sealing is a little trickier. There are a lot of different kinds of wax. You've got the standard red stick, the kind we carry. That's the real shellac. It doesn't have a wick in it.
Right.
A lot of the waxes you see today have wicks in them. At least with this style of wax, I don't like it when it has a wick in it. It really gets in your way.
It really kind of does, and that is not something they would have had at the time. The wick in the sealing wax probably dates to the 1890s, early 1900s. So sealing wax was sold in large sticks. Okay, here we go. We're going to try this. Yeah, this is going to take a while. Start probably a quarter inch down from the top, and just kind of get the sides started. Be careful, because especially with the shellac wax, it has a tendency to want to catch fire. That's not the end of the world either, but you just don't want flaming bits of wax going everywhere while you're doing this. And after a while, you'll notice it'll start to want to bubble and melt and want to try to move around on you. Once that starts, it's just a juggling act. Start shifting your hand and playing with that little molten ball of wax, and keep it moving, because if you stand in one place, it'll catch fire, it'll drip all over the place. Here we go, we're going to try it. One blob there. In it goes. Give it just a second. Then move your...
And there's your seal. Perfect.
And a perfect seal.
You did it perfect.
That was surprising, because if it was going to go wrong, it usually happens in a situation like this. So
you got to be careful. You might mess it up. Let's do a wafer. I want to see how much
the
faster
wafers
this is.
are fairly simple. And again, this is going to be a little bit. It'll be faster even then, because I'm not putting it under my tongue.
Right.
The formula I use, I don't know what kind of things I might catch, but we're going to use the damp cloth. We just need a moisture there, and I'm going to use my wafer stamp here. Find the spot here where you're going to put that thing in, and then just dampen the surface just slightly, and that'll help it catch.
Okay.
And then what we're going to do is just get this thing wet a little bit.
So a little bit of
dripping in there. Okay, now
There
got
we
some
go.
water on there. And just start melting that glue right there. And I can already feel it getting tacky and sticky and yucky, and that's what you want. And once it gets to about that consistency, yeah, that's about right. Stick that up under where the
two
wet
connects, yeah.
point is. You can even see it ghosting
Right.
the surface there. Take your wafer stamp. And it takes a fair bit of muscle, I find, to, you want to
Get that impression
get
in
those,
there.
basically those fibers to connect so the glue sticks.
And then we get a nice look to it.
And you get that character board, of course, called a waffle effect or a checkerboard effect, but that's the characteristic effect of a wafer seal. And I see that in a lot in early 19th century correspondence that I've handled. It was advisable to let it dry before you send it in the mail. So it might take 10, 15 minutes for that to fully dry before the glue is actually set. Otherwise, it can still pop open in the mail pouch.
Yeah, and I would think moisture or, if it got damp, it might undo. But since this letter is sort of sealed, it folded up into itself, it's not really going to pop open.
And the one I did earlier, you can see it's not coming loose.
No.
It will not come loose. So it's a fairly secure way of holding it shut.
We've got our letter. It's sealed up. What about postage? What's the post office like?
Well, you're going to actually put your address or your direction, as they said in those days, your direction on the blank side away from the seal, and then you're going to drop it in the postman's bag, or you're going to go to the post office if you're in a big city, or you're going to give it to a friend to drop off at the post office. It's not rocket science in those days. They're still developing it, especially in the late 18th, early 19th century. There are some advanced post offices like Philadelphia under Ben Franklin. They're all based on the British Postal Service. Out in the boondocks where I'm from, Tennessee, it was basically a mailman's pouch and taking the mail down the Natchez Trace to New Orleans and back up into Virginia. So that could be haphazard. That could be subject to the weather, to hazards on the trail. And that's all going to affect postage.
Now, sometimes you read in the journals like, oh, I left the letters at the tavern or whatever, where they might come in 2 weeks to pick them up.
Right. And you're thinking to yourself, well, how did they get them to the recipient without paying for it? They just dropped them off. Well, that's one of the things about the postage in those days. The recipient paid the charges, not the mailer. So this is free to drop in the mail. It's not free at the other end. So whatever charges go through, and it's charged on the mileage it went, the weight of it. That's why they were trying to use as little paper as possible.
Right, so you don't use an envelope because that weighs more.
Exactly. So if you're adding to that, that's going to add to the charges, the difficulty of the journey. So if it's going over rivers in a postman's pouch, that's going to add to it. So all that factors in. And then once that gets to the other end, whoever gets the letter has to pay all those charges.
Sure.
So a lot of times you'll see dead letters, they call them, dead letter office, where somebody didn't recognize the signature, didn't know what it was about, said, I'm not going to go to that much trouble, and threw it back. And some of those have never been opened in 200 or 300 years.
Wow.
So
that'd be a treasure trove, wouldn't it?
Well, there's actually in where was this? In the Netherlands recently.
Nice.
A trunk of I think it was 1,200, and I think only 800 of them were still unopened, and they'd been posted anywhere between 1670 and 1720. You talk about a treasure trove. It had just sat in the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands for the last 100 years, and nobody'd opened them. So they're just now starting to go through and scholarly change it. I think it's called the Signed, Sealed, Undelivered Project, and it's great to watch online if you really want this the trivia of how to do this. As it goes through the journey, and this is something I teach in my classes, it's going to pick up character, and that's one of the things to make it look real. Postal stamps. Not like today; they didn't use a prepaid stamp that would come along in the 1840s. But as it goes through, postal marks would be applied by usually lead stamps in those days, dipped in ink and stamped to the letter. I teach methods for replicating it. Of course, you can get rubber stamps today to do similar things. There's other ways to do it. But I find that really adds to the character as ship letters that came through the post overseas. It really kind of adds to the character and lets you see where the journey came from and the narrative that the letter would tell.
I came home, and I had a roommate with me. I was on this side, my bed was here, and he was on this side. So I'm there probably looking at something on the computer or whatever, Usually when you get incoming, that voice comes on. Incoming, incoming, incoming. This time, nothing. All you heard was boom. And it was like, I was like, dude, is that us or is that them? It's outgoing and incoming. And he was like, I don't know. And then we heard another one, boom, trailer shakes. I was like, oh my God, these are close, dude. We got to get to this bunker. And he was like, yeah, let's go, because I am not trying to be in this trailer when a mortar hits. So, because it's really thin metal. If you ever knocked on like a truck metal, like in the back of a flatbed, it's like really thin. We get up, we get dressed, I'm going outside the door. The bunker's like, dude, like from me to you, that's where the entrance to the bunker is at. And my door is right here. We come out, and as soon as we get to the side, right there, dude. And the crazy part about it is when the mortar blew up, the first thing in my mind that I thought about was that this looks nothing like the movies. I thought, because in the movies you get like a big fireball and it's so, this was just, it was just sparks. It was just sparks and dust. And then I had pain in my ankle. And then my roommate had pain in his stomach. And I was like, holy crap, I just got freaking mortared. I was like, we gotta get in this bunker. So I'm pushing him now. I'm like, we gotta get this bunker. I'm pushing. We can't see because it's dust everywhere. Like I said, the fine powder is all in the air now. Now we got like a mini dust storm going on in our little area. And he gets in the bunker. I can't see. I run straight into the bunker. It hits me in the forehead, the big concrete block, because I forgot to duck, because I'm a little bit taller than the bunker. I don't know why they made the bunkers so freaking tiny, but yeah, I ran into it. I get into the bunker, and people know we just got hit. So the other people are coming into the bunkers, and they see him. He got little holes on his stomach here, and I got blood on my ankle going down to my shoe, and I have blood dripping down my nose and down my face. And people are freaking the fuck out, dude. They're like, oh my god, they're about to. I was just like, what are y'all talking about? And I felt my forehead, and I was like, oh, dude. Oh, I was like, no, don't worry, that's okay. I ran into the bunker. I was like, don't worry, I'm okay. It's just, I just ran into the bunker here. And I was like, I'm not hit that bad, but I just got a little thing with my ankle. So they sent around a medical truck, and they came over there and picked us up, and, they took all the metal pieces out of my ankle. And the next day, I went out there, and I could see the hole where the mortar went in. I could see the barbecue grill over there laying there. Nobody touched it. Like, I thought it would be like a team who comes in and inspects stuff and, make sure everything is like good and things like that. But no, nobody touched it. It was just there. The guy who owns that bar grill, he always put it outside with the bricks, the big stone wall. We call it a T-wall because it looks like an upside down T. But he always puts it outside T-wall. The workers who come in our little camp and clean up the area, trash, do all that stuff, make it a little pretty, they always took his bar grill and put it on the other side. The guy hated that. It drove him crazy because after he got off work, he always wanted to barbecue a steak or a burger. This day, the fateful day where my life got saved by a barbecue grill, a Weber barbecue grill. The guy comes back from work earlier in the day than he normally does. He took the barbecue grill and put it back around the wall. I looked at the barbecue grill, and the barbecue grill was completely Swiss cheese, dude. That's probably one of the only times where I literally got scared, especially when I found one of the metal pieces that goes in these bombs. It looked like if you took a metal piece and you took a hammer and you just started hitting it all kinds of ways, and you took that and put it in the bomb. That's what's going through people. It's really jagged, ugly metal that's just cutting through people as it goes up. That was just a little too close to home, and that was my third time of almost dying in Iraq without a weapon. My roommate, he was peppered, dude. He had like little small metal pieces all in his stomach, while I got saved by the barbecue grill, and it went under the barbecue grill and got me in the ankle. Oh, by the way, this happened 2 days before I was about to leave. It's because of complacency. Or bad luck. This grill has literally saved me and my roommate's life. Because if the grill wasn't there, there would have been, when the mortar hit behind the grill, it came up and hit the grill. And because of the grill is round, the metal went in it and shot out like this, up. And it blew the grill up with it. But if the grill wasn't there, we was free game. That was all us, man. So we got saved by a barbecue grill because a guy wanted to cook a steak. Oh, man. Well, I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. You know, Fayetteville, North Carolina, I like to think of it as like a black hole. Like, once you're in there, most people can't get out. That's why I had to get up out of there. And it was like a nowhere to go unless it's military. So most people there go Army. I wanted to go Air Force, but the Air Force recruiter wouldn't come pick me up. So I had to call somebody else, and I called the Marines. And the Marine guy was like, yeah, buddy, we'll come pick you up right now. Within an hour, he was at my house. And as an 18-year-old, you know, you heard the Marines are crazy psychopaths. We're in the house, like, peeking out the window, like, oh, is he gonna come in here and, like, destroy everything, go crazy, illness and stuff? Which is totally insane now that I wasn't Marine and stuff, but it was awesome, to be honest with you, because I was always dreaming to leave the United States. Like, growing up as a kid, one of my main places that I always wanted to go was Australia. And for some reason, Australia was always in my mind as growing up. So I knew I was destined to go somewhere. I didn't expect to leave the United States totally. And they sent me straight to Japan. So I was excited, man. Anything to get out of the Fayetteville, North Carolina, you know, see something different. So thanks to the Marines, people say a lot of things about the military and things like that, but it probably saved my life in the end, you know, because Fayetteville is a town that has a lot of drugs and shootings and things like this. Just like without the military, Fayetteville would not exist. So yeah, I was happy to get out of there, and at a young age, you know, it's just ready to see the world and take it on, you know, and they provided that opportunity, and I'm forever grateful to the Marines for that. They were happy, my family, but they were also, you know, sad because, you know, it was one of those situations where they're losing their, like, I was the only son. I grew up with a house full of women. So props up to my mama, especially from where we come from. And we're coming from a place where we used to dig for change in a couch for hot dogs or chili and things like this, you know, to eat. My mom was working like 3 jobs just to, you know, put food on the table. But the craziest things about it, like I tell everybody now, is that, you know, we were happy. We didn't know we were poor, if you know what I mean. So it's like one of those feelings. Like I remember specifically when I was like 12 years old, I took like a hanger and I broke off the top part, and I got like a bunch of tape from the store. I saved up a bunch of pennies and went to the store and bought some tape, and I tried to make my own boomerang. So I was wrapping all the tape around and putting in great work, and I felt so good about myself, and I went out back and threw it, and it didn't go anywhere. It just went straight down. I guess it was like one of my biggest failures of my life, my first one. So my Discovery Channel was watching like some wasps on our window. The window was right here, and they started building their nest like right here. And I watched it when this thing was like super tiny to get to like this big. And I was just watching it inside, because you can see them all like moving around and working it, going everywhere and biting the edges and building it, and it was so cool. And then you saw the queen was in the middle, and she was doing all her larvae, and could see them like come home at night and they go on the outside and do their whole thing. Then they all start going inside, and it It was pretty dope. And then I got in trouble because I didn't let nobody know there was a gigantic wasp nest on my window. So yeah, they came and took it down, and then that was it. So yeah, but I grew up around the military. I wouldn't say it necessarily influenced me. I don't know. I just always had that bug. Like for instance, when we had these window blinds, the white ones. It's a roll and you gotta pull it down. I always used to draw tanks and planes on it and military guys, and I had like a big ass war going on in my wall, so that's what I fell asleep to. It's kind of crazy when I think about it. Like a 6-year-old kid drawing military planes and tanks shooting at each other, and that's what I'm going to sleep to as I look, drift off. And I remember I used to look out my window and I used to see the air show. That's how I watched the air show, because Hope Air Force Base was just like around the corner. They'd be coming up over the trees and I get so excited and stuff, and it was awesome. I always wanted to be a pilot. That was my original thing, i.e. Air Force. But I have bad eyes. Didn't quite work out. I wouldn't say I was too broken up about it at the time. I'm probably more broken up about it now than back then, because I just wanted money and I wanted to get out of Fayetteville. So, bro, I remember specifically when I first got off the plane in Japan. It's a feeling. Unless you truly see it, it's hard to understand, where you look and you can't understand anything. And there's no chance. Like, for instance, if you go to like Mexico or something, you can kind of associate the vocabulary. If they say agua, that's like water. You put two and two together. But in Japan, yeah, it's kind of over for you. Kanji's like all over the place. So it's like complete culture shock, because they drive on the left side of the road too. But I mean, like anything in life, you can get used to it. You can get used to anything. Let me try to remember now. This was 20 years ago. They're actually kind of a blur, because I was doing a lot of drinking. We'll get up at 5 in the morning, then we'll go do PT, which PT is like physical training, where you're running around and doing pull-ups and sit-ups and, just getting real buff, and getting ready for war. Hoorah. But it was just all that good stuff, You just, after that, you get back from PT, you take a quick shower, get all ready for work, then you go back downstairs, you get in formation. You know what? As I was talking to you just now, I noticed that the Marines did a lot of head counts, like prisons. So I just made me think of it. Like, you go to PT, they do a head count. After you get out of PT, you take a shower, you come downstairs, they do a head count. Go to work, and you do all that stuff, and typically sometimes before you get off work, they do a head count. So you're making sure nobody escapes.
Marines get lost a lot.
Yes they do. Yes. Speaking of that, when I was in Japan, we had Operation Crocodile something. Anyway, we went to Australia. That was freaking awesome, dude. That was the first time I ever got on a ship. Again, Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I never even rode a public bus to. Now I'm on a plane, getting shot overseas, and now I'm on a military ship in the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by battleships. This is freaking crazy. This is sick, man. So we went down to Australia. Oh, Australia. Remember, I said I always remember that when I was a kid. So that was like... So we get to Australia, and we go there and do our little exercise and stuff. And when we were leaving, they couldn't find like 3 Marines. 3 Marines just decided, hey, I'm just gonna hang out over here and not go back with you guys. And we literally left without these guys. I don't know if they ever got found again or what happened, but yeah. Hey man, that accident will get you. I actually was about to get out the Marines in Japan, and I actually re-enlisted. But there's always some person who's not doing their job correctly, and I guess this person messed up my paperwork somehow. Something happened. It all worked out, but somebody messed up, so they had to do my paperwork again. So I was like, okay, cool. So I'm doing my paperwork. Everything's all good. My mom calls me, and then she was like, well, you should look into contracting. And I was like, contract? I didn't even know what contracting was. I didn't even know the military employed civilians. So That was a whole new thing to me. And she was like, oh, well, they're hiring a bunch of people in Iraq. And I was like, so you want me to go to war? So I was like, this makes no sense. But then she told me they're paying $80,000. I was like, oh, okay, let's check this out. I write this guy. He writes me back immediate, like not even 2 seconds. It was the fastest reply email I ever got in my life. And it was like, yeah, we're gonna set you up, we'll get you back here, and then we're gonna get you rocking. That was a whole crazy thing. I get back to North Carolina and hang with my family for like a couple weeks or so. And they shipped me off to Houston, Texas. That's where they were doing processing at this time. I'm not gonna say the name because, you know, that's the whole situation. I don't care about. I just don't want no problems. Wait, you can beep it out, but you can know. It's called. That's the company I was working with at that time, and it was like that was freaking crazy, man. Because they were pulling people off the street. Like, bro, sorry, I'm getting intense here. Like, we're about to go to Iraq and help our soldiers with support of any whatever job they gave us in Iraq, a war zone, and they're pulling people off the street because they got such a big contract and they need people now. I was in there in my class of my training with people who was homeless like the day before, the night before. Like they didn't even get the change. Like it was crazy. They were just going out in Houston, just pulling all kinds of people, man, just snatching them up, piling them into the building, pushing them in. Not everybody went through because some people popped on the drug test, it was always kind of funny because when people popped on the drug test, they're just like a big black van that pulls up in front of the door. And then you have people walking out like the chain gang. It's just so he was like, oh, okay, I guess they were smoking. So yeah, it was wild, dude. They just pushed us all through. Like, hey, here's a gas mask. This is how you do this. You take this tape and wrap it around your hands in case you get a biological attack. I was like, where the fuck did I get myself into? I was thinking, am I sure I want to do this? They gave us this big yellow paper plastic bag to put on us in case you get chemical attacked. And some rinky-dinky masks like somebody will use for painting. And they gave us that, like the vest. I sent you a picture with the vest. They gave us that vest, and like, okay, you're good. Now let's teach you what to do if you get captured. It's like, oh my god. Keep in mind, this is 2004, when all hell was breaking loose in Iraq. If you get captured, just give your name, rank, serial. Don't give them any more information. It wasn't updated that these people are cutting your heads off. Like, there is no escape. So it was like, well, if they come in and capture you, just sit there and don't fight. Just don't say anything. Just cooperate with your captives. And I immediately had in my mind, like, I am not going to cooperate if it came to that. It's just going to be it. Because I refuse to let somebody cut my head off. Like, for instance, in my mind, I put it in my mind multiple times. If I ever was captured and if they was ever about to try to cut my head off, I'm just going to keep kicking over the camera. Like, I don't care what's going to happen, but you're not going to get the shot of the day on me. So, but that was in my mind. I was like, whatever happens, I'm just going to keep kicking and keep trying to find the camera and make their life as hard as possible. But, you know, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. When you get out the Marines, they give you an exit interview and they tell you, like, well, you need to let us know if there's anything wrong with you or something like that. You know, I'm a young kid. I think I was like 23, something before. Not sure. Can't remember. But I was young. And I didn't know nothing about nothing. So when I'm getting out and they said, do you have anything wrong with you? I was like, well, just so you know, if there's something wrong with you, we're going to have to hold you here and we're going to have to correct that issue before you can go. So I'm about to go to Iraq, make $80,000 and work overseas. And you're telling me you're not going to let me go if I tell you anything is wrong with me. I was in the Marines. There is something wrong with me, I promise you. But I'm not staying here. So I told him, no, I'm good. I'm not going to go. And now that's biting me in the butt. You try to get your benefits later. It just doesn't work out because you said you were healthy. They said you were perfectly healthy when you left. Now my foot's falling off. I got problems in my legs. My hips are bad. And my back is jacked up. But it's all good. Just everything with the hips. It's just mostly from the bag. Like when you do the ruck marches, when you have the really big bag on, and those bags are super heavy. So I'm flat-footed. Just something with my bones is just over time, they just started deteriorating. I mean, I try to ignore it. I'm like 40 years old now, so yeah, they're starting to show their wear and tear. I remember one time we were doing a ruck march, and I had a really big bag on, of course. I had my M16, which is stupid heavy. Those new guys with those little light, small weapons, crying with their scopes. I sound like a bitter old man. We had our M16s, and then on top of that, I had the 240 Golf, which is a machine gun. And this thing is heavy. So I had both of these, carrying them in my bag. And I remember specifically crying, but not crying. It's like your body was so hurt that your soul started crying. It was just tears just coming out. And I didn't know why, because it wasn't like, oh, I'm so sad or hurt. No, it was just, I can't even describe it. And then we just walking, singing a song. Like, hardy, 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 hardy. For the very first time I entered Iraq space, we're on the plane. We're just on this little white plane. The company I was working for had a white plane, like a 737, all white, and it's called a Freedom Bird. Anything that flies in the military is called a Freedom Bird, if it can take you home. It could be a helicopter, it's called a Freedom Bird, doesn't matter. So we called it a Freedom Bird, and there was a Russian pilot. This dude was the craziest pilot I ever flew with. So we're coming into Balad, Iraq, right? So we're coming in like this, and we can kind of see the airport and the base down here. And by the way, Iraq is beautiful, dude. It's like beautiful country. It really sucks that there's a war going there. Afghanistan too is amazing. The mountains in the back, but I digress. Anyway, you can see it. It's so beautiful, and there's farm fields around, and you see the base, and then the plane just looks like starts going in circles like this. I'm like, holy crap! Everybody's holding on to their seat, like, because we didn't know about combat landings. No civilian really knows about that. So we just like are totally sideways. I'm staring at the ground. I can literally see the shadow of the plane. And usually you don't see that until you get really close. But I'm like looking at the ground, I'm like, oh, this is so freaking scary. And then he came in, landed perfectly, literally saved my life later, which we're going to get to. But he landed the plane, and we got to their taxi gate. We got in there. And as soon as they opened the door, incoming. We're on a freaking plane. The guy comes on the plane. He's like, everybody, just stay here. Do not move. On a tin can thing full of jet fuel. Yeah, this is exactly where I want to stay. And I was like, well, it's going to be a quick tour of Iraq. And so we had incomes coming in. You could hear them like, that's all you hear. You don't really see anything. You just hear it. That's my first mental fuck of getting to Iraq. Like, welcome to Iraq. Some of the people on the plane didn't even get off. They went right back. It's open contract. So, but with the open contract, it also means they can do the same thing to you. They could just tell you, bye. We don't need you no more. Nobody's really trained for incoming. Like real incoming, you can train all you want, but there's a difference when you know somebody's actively trying to kill you. So that's not the same. After we got off the plane, the other shocking part was how hot it was. It's like stepping out of the plane and then you're You just had income. You step outside, you get hit with like 130-degree heat. It's like the best way. If you ever want to know what it feels like in Iraq, grab a hairdryer, turn it on high heat, and hold it out from your face and blow it on yourself, and you'll know exactly what it feels like to like be in Iraq. And it's not an exaggeration. It's very hot. So as we're walking down the stairs, and I'm just trying to get my breath and get adjusted, I'm like, you don't know what's going on, because they just flew you from Houston to Dubai, and then you went from Dubai to went to Kuwait, and then we went to Kuwait to Iraq. So we just got here. I'm super tired. You don't know what's going on, and you're just trying to get through the day. So it was a big shock in itself, but it was also kind of cool. This is Iraq, man. Like, I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I'm in Balad, Iraq. So it's crazy. So I was gonna see it through regardless. But yeah, they took us over to like the PX, and the PX is like a shopping center where you can go and buy clothing and stuff, some foods and things like this. It's like a big ass Walmart for the military. Let's put it like that. The guy who took us to the PX, he told us that a couple days ago they had incoming at the PX. And the thing that happened was there was a bunch of people out there. I think they had like a grand opening or something. I can't quite remember. But it was a lot of people there. And they had incoming. So it's like if we're talking right now. We're talking, all you hear is incoming. It's totally shocking. You're not prepared for it. You're not ready. So that came on with those people there. And the incoming came in, hit behind the PX. A rocket or whatever it was, a mortar, I'm not sure. Probably was a mortar, because that's all they mostly shot, because those jerks would freeze the mortars and then run away, and then they'll shoot off later. So the mortar hit behind the PX, and the people got scared, so they ran in the PX. Next mortar comes in, it hits the PX, but the PX is a hard structure, meaning it's made of stone, so it didn't really do much damage. And the people, in the normal people's psyche mind, nobody wants to stay under a building when it's getting hit. That's just the normal mind of an average citizen. The people got the bright idea to run back outside. And as soon as they ran outside, another mortar hit right there. So yeah, it's pretty bad. And you could see the holes still on the wall. And I remember getting there, and I'm a curious person. I remember looking at the walls, and I was just so curious, just imagining like, wow, and just feeling bad, because these are just a lot of the people who got killed that day was just normal people, not military, and they were just trying to make money, and they got promised $100,000, $200,000, and they never get to spend it. That's sad. That's Iraq, man. That's war. I seen a guy who was on your show before, and he was a contractor. He was like a military contractor, more military than I was. I was more of a support contractor. My job was to make sure our roads were clean. So they paid me, get this, they paid me $80,000 to watch people sweep the streets in Iraq. They wanted to make sure they didn't get too muddy. So I was a labor foreman, and I was walking around with these people. Like, I ain't gonna say these people, that's very rude of me, I'm sorry. They were Filipino guys, and I also had some Indian guys. So I had like a mixed crowd of like 12 guys. They were great guys, fantastic. Some of the friendliest people you meet on this earth. I love them to death. But these guys, they were hilarious. But yeah, they get out our truck, and I follow behind them, and we're just basically just getting the dust off the side of the street. And it's kind of weird sweeping the street in Iraq. I guess they needed the street to be clean, so when the tanks drive or whoever drives that night, they can see what's going on. But yeah, we had to sweep the streets. If we got mortars incoming and things like that, we had to take some cement out there and patch up the holes and stuff, so we don't have like potholes all over the place. I patched too. Teamwork makes the dream work, but it's really true. Everything I've seen that's successful in this world was always a team. I wanted to make this, if I'm gonna clean streets, I'm gonna make these the cleanest streets I ever seen. So I was actually pretty proud of our work, though. It's like we sweep the streets and get it done, and then, it's like, wow, this is pretty good. I didn't protect anybody because in Iraq, I was an unarmed combatant. My company didn't allow us to carry weapons. Typically, the guys who carried weapons got paid pretty handsomely, and they deserve it. Those guys are in some harm's way. Then you have other contracts that's like, she got paid okay, more than the States, more than North Carolina. So you got paid pretty well. And yeah, I helped them patch up the holes. I helped them do different things. We had to do sandbags. So, by the way, remember the guy you talked to a while ago? He was talking about how Iraq is pitch dark at night. 1000% true. You can't see shit. But the sky is super freaking beautiful, bro. I cannot describe it. It's super beautiful. One night, we're driving home, and I have like this bus, and I got all my guys in the back. They're laying back, getting sleepy. So I'm driving on our base is like this. Just think of the base like a triangle or a square. See, Marine, and the outside is the outside road. So we're driving on the outside, going back to our base, and I'm driving a bus, and off in the distance, I see a light. It's just a small speck, like a little light. I'm like, what the fuck is that? And I was like, driving, the light's just pointing straight at me. And I'm like, what the heck is that? I thought it was a UFO. I literally thought I was seeing a UFO. I was like, dude, this is about to be sick. And then I see the light like pointing like this, and then the lights just starts going like this, swinging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm looking harder, and I see a big barrel from a A1 Abrams coming directly at my bus. The A1 Abrams is a tank. I doubt that bus would have made that tank even do a hiccup. I nearly crapped myself as I turned the bus off the road, barely missing the Abrams as a tank column's going through, and the tank commander's on top like yelling at me, as he drives by. I'm like, dude, I cannot see you. Nobody briefed me that there's gonna be A1 Abrams on this road at the middle of the night. Nobody told us stuff. So I was not prepared, and that was my first almost death in Iraq. From the M1 Abrams running over my little bus that I was driving with my guys at night. That would have been bad. The living situation was actually pretty cool, except during the daytime, because it got so hot that if you had anything in there that wasn't like, I don't know, heat resistance, it melted. Melted chocolate looks really weird when it comes back together, and then you eat it, gets like white spots all over it. And I was always nervous to eat it. I was like, is this okay, man? So I kind of left chocolate alone when I was in Iraq, because I remember I bought a Twix. I opened it up and it looked like a freaking cheetah. So I was like, no, I'm not eating this. If you touched any type of metal, yeah, you're gonna burn real fast. And that's the worst part, when you get in your car and you don't know when your elbow accidentally hits that belt buckle, you get that little sizzle real quick. Yeah, that was Iraq. The sand in Iraq, it's like powder. It's baby powder. It's not like regular sand. I've never seen anything like this anywhere else I've been. It's like if you step on it, it's like, it's so crazy. It's like your Godzilla creating big paths. So, sandstorms were pretty easy. All you needed were just a little bit of wind, just kick it up, and then you're sucking all that in, which you'll probably pay for later, but that's another story. Actually, some people are actually coming out right now that are having effects from back then, because you had the sand, and then the military was doing a lot of burning at the burn pits and stuff, and all that stuff just sweeping over the base into your beautiful lungs, and you're sucking it all in. You're just like, ugh, it stinks today. You don't know in 20 years you're going to be struggling. I know people who are having breathing problems, things like that. And I read stories also online where some people are trying to make lawsuits because of the burn pits and things like this. It's like really becoming a bigger issue now, because, things like that, you don't see it right away. It comes later. I got done with the street sweeping job. Me being stupid. I was stupid. I wanted to make my resume better, because I had to be the big guy on campus. I couldn't just be happy. I gave myself more headaches. I took a job as a quality inspector. Quality inspector is just I go around and I check the bridge, to make sure it's sturdy, and as people stand on it, it's not going to fall off. Make sure the wood is perfectly like separated, nails are where they're supposed to be, and making sure this bridge is made to manufacturer specifications. Just basically, that's all I did, going around checking everywhere, things like that. As I got this job, I did a lot of traveling. So that's when I got to go up to Al Assad Air Base, and I did my checks up there, made sure everything is good, met with the managers and everything like that. As we're flying back to Balad, well, it ain't the Freedom Bird because we're not being free, so it's just a plane to me this day. We're going back to Balad, and we're flying, but that day we had a sandstorm. So we're flying, we're going around. You can see the base kinda through little cracks and stuff. Like you see it, and you're like, okay, we're flying. And then after the sandstorm started clearing out, they cleared just the land. We started going lower. And we stopped, started circling again. They got incoming. Can't land a plane when you have incoming. Maybe that's a new rule, I don't know. But this day, we did not land because we had incoming. So maybe it was like at the airport, they didn't want to risk it. We're circling again. Keep in mind, we didn't have enough gas for this type of flight. So we're still going around. And then as we start going lower to try to land again, they tell them there's fog. We have fog now. So we're going around again. We're going to wait to see if some of this fog go away. He left Balad and we went somewhere else. I don't know where we went. I think we went to a place called Talil, Iraq. So it was like kind of further south. So we're coming into Talil. Talil's freaking foggy too. We don't have no more gas. The captain came on the freaking speaker and said, we're low on fuel. We have to land this plane right now. And we're only going to be able to do it in 1 or 2 passes. So he kind of just let us know, like, we might be screwed over here. That's a really chilling message, like you really are getting yourself like, this might be it. You don't want to believe it, but it just might be, So we're coming into Talil and he's going down. So as we're coming down, I'm looking out the window because I'm on the right hand side, like the wing is right here and I'm a little bit behind it. So I'm just looking at the wing. As we're landing, I'm looking out the window and I can see something going by. I can't tell if it's a tree or not because I was thinking we can't be that low yet. That's my just knowledge of airlines and airplanes. I was like, I don't think we're that low yet, but we could possibly be. So I see something like going by, and it's going faster and faster. Like, what the fuck is going on? We had a very low ceiling, which means the fog starts here and the runway's here. So this part is clear, but you had to get under that to be able to see. So as soon as the plane came out of the fog into the clearing, I could literally see both sides of the runway. And that's not good. If you can see both sides of the runway, you're not on the runway. So I'm watching the runway on this side. I'm like, oh my God, literally my heart. The feeling I had was like, that's the best way I could describe it. There is no words for that. That's the only, I was like, and then, I see that we're probably about to hit dirt because he don't have much. Like I said, I've always been in a plane. So I knew when the position that we were, we didn't have much time at all. So we go sideways like this. I could see the wingtip on the runway. Like it's touching the runways, like sparks. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to die in a plane crash. That's the first thing in my mind. I was like, this is freaking. I went to Iraq and died in a plane crash. Like, dude. I mean, it's not like you get to pick and choose, but blaze of glory, man. Freak. So yeah, the plane wing is on the ground, and then the plane starts like about somersaulting, and then he jerks it back this way, and then we just like it straightens out. And he stops it right at the edge before it went off the runway. The craziest thing about like a plane crash, like landing, when it's like a really bad one, like a really bad, is nobody said anything. I thought there was going to be people like freaking out, screaming, and nobody said a word. It was quiet as a mouse. It's like everybody just like, okay, I guess this is it. The wing was like bent like this. Like that plane wasn't flying over, dude. He had to land that plane, and he knew we had no more gas. Under the conditions he landed it in, it's just spectacular. Low visibility, low ceiling. I don't know what happened, because typically there, as far as I know, there's like a beacon that glides you in, but I'm not sure what happened. Maybe it was off that day or whatever, or something happened. Who knows? It's Iraq. As I turned and looked around, I saw ladies crying. I saw dudes crying. People were really broken up over this, man. A lot of people were distraught after the fact, once that adrenaline started coming down. One thing about war is it teaches you that the world will always turn. If I got hit right now, disappeared, this snow doesn't stop falling, Peter don't stop staring. Now everything is gonna keep moving, and you just have to deal with that. I left Balad, and the bad part about Balad is like when I got to Balad, Iraq, we called it Mortar City, and it earned that name because it was mortars constantly, all the time. It's mortars coming in. Before I was about to leave Balad, it stopped. So they put in like a pool, they put in Baskin Robbins, they put in like, we were talking about putting in a Chili's down there, like a big restaurant where you can go and eat like steak and potatoes and hamburgers and popcorn in a movie theater. They had nachos in a movie theater. They had like a karaoke place you could go to, Green Bean, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, all this on this little base. So now I'm getting sent to Baghdad. Camp Victory was pretty cool. There was a lot more people there. They also had karaoke and things like that. So, hold on. My little man was crying. Oh, my little baby has a cold, man. He got slight congestion. Yeah, he's 2 years old, so it's like, he always gets super scared. At least I do. I have like so much fear. You don't want to think the worst, but it always like pops in, and you like try to throw it out again, and it pops back in, and you throw it out again. You don't ever want to think that, because you don't want it to bring to fruition and things like this. It's a constant fight. Okay, so I got to my new location, and everything was good. I was working there for a while. The mean guys, I don't want to say that terrorists or whatever, just the guys who were trying to kill us, they always seem to love to attack at like 2 or 3 in the morning. So you be sleeping, dead sleep, like knocked out, and you hear, incoming, that's the C-RAM going off now. And this thing shoots like so many rounds. It looks like Star Wars, and it just follows like the mortar or the missile as it comes in. It's super sick. You should get on the ground, but human nature, if somebody sees something like that, they're gonna look up because it looks so freaking cool. Sometimes they left us alone, especially when it was like foggy. It was foggy, or not foggy, but like a sandstorm. Typically you didn't get an incoming, so it's pretty cool. They actually had that day off, so you knew you might sleep good that night. I felt decently safe, but again, it's Iraq. For instance, a little bit outside of our compound was like a tent area, and in that tent there was a soldier. He was in there. He was doing bench presses. So he was lifting his weight. A stray bullet came over the gate, went past there, went into the tent, hit him in the neck while he was doing bench press. So you just never know when it's your time. And it was his time, sadly. It's just one of those things. So that's one of those things that reminds you that you're never too far from the danger. It kind of wakes you up like, oh, you're getting a little too comfortable. You need to wake up and remember where you're at. So it's one of those situations. In Iraq, you're never far away from the danger. That's just what it is. So if you go there and you try to work, you can die. And that is the real thing. People are really dying there. And contractor deaths don't quite get bored like that. So, your family might know. So that's good. But you're not going to be a hero. To everybody else, you're just a person trying to use the military for money and things like that. When I got back home and I was in the free road, the trash truck dropping the dumpster used to freak me out. If I heard any noise that sounded like a C-Ram, or even if there's a voice that sounds like the first part of the incoming, if I hear a tone that sounds like that, it triggers you. I didn't sleep well. I remember one time I was sleeping and my girlfriend came in. I remember waking up barely, and all I saw was a black shadow. And I immediately grabbed her arm, and I was just about to react. But then I remembered, you're not in Iraq. You're not in Iraq. And I scared the shit out of her. I scared the shit out of me too. It's just one of those things. I know for the longest time, and I'm just now kind of getting over it. I used to shit my pants every time a plane, not literally, but every time a plane was landing, I would have a heart attack. I would grab my seat and just freak out, and just more than when I did when I was actually in a real plane crash. So, but now I'm starting to get over it, but it's still in me. My heart starts beating really fast every time we start landing, and even though everything's okay, it's just worse thoughts.
How did you end up living in Germany?
After I got out, I was thinking it's either going to be Australia, back to Japan, or Germany, because a lot of the military guys were telling me about Germany. And Germany sounds pretty cool. Why not? And I never been there. I just went straight to Germany, went to Berlin. I just never looked back, man. Germany was awesome. And I started having fun in Berlin and meeting new people and partying. Dude, I partied with so many stars. It is freaking ridiculous. I remember one day I was at the club drinking in Berlin. Just drinking with my friend who I met there. His name is Van Tel. It's like my big brother. He's like a DJ there. And we're drinking. Well, I'm drinking. He don't really drink. So I was doing my thing. And freaking Little John comes in. Holy crap, dude. He comes in here with the East Side Boys. This is when Little John, I'm not sure people are aware of him, but he was really big back in the day. But he came in with the East Side Boys. They just had a concert, They got everything for them back there and stuff. And I was like, holy crap, this is freaking Little John, dude. And the first thing he wanted that made me laugh so bad, he wanted some KFC chicken. So I was like, dude, really, out of everything, that's what you want when you first come here? Okay, cool. But they were really cool guys, man. You would think they were all crazy and hype all the time. Now they're really chill, dude. They were really, really awesome. Started to learn German a little bit. I love Germany, man. And plus with Germany, you have Spain, you have Greece, you have Italy, Poland, Sweden. You're surrounded by history. It's so insane, dude. Go to Normandy. You can went to what's that place called? One of the concentration camps, and that was an eye opener. So yeah, you got so many things here, man. It's just, and the reason I didn't go to Australia was because it's in the middle of nowhere. So I was like, dude, if I ever want to travel, I'm gonna have to pay an arm and a leg to get off of that continent. So I was like, I don't know about that.
Why do you avoid the word terrorist?
I mean, as you start thinking about it after the war dies down and you get away from fighting, you can actually process, like, you understand, like, the strife that they were going through and things like that. Not saying being sympathized and things like that. What they're doing was messed up. They're terrorizing people and being bullies. So whenever there's a bully, you send in the Marines and they'll tame your bully. But yeah, they were being bullies, but at the same time, you know, you see the way they were living and you see the things they had to go through. Is that person now a terrorist? You know? So that's why I don't like using that word. I think a terrorist is kind of different. That's just what it was, man. They wanted people to make an example out of, so they can scare the people out of their country, which, you know, ain't much you can say on that. You're not gonna scare the United States out of this country by kidnapping some random Joe Smo that they don't care about and cutting his head off. They'd be like, oh, we'll pray for him and his family. Okay, let's go on our next patrol. So it was just a weird situation, man. But I don't regret it. I learned so much from all those experiences to make me who I am today. You're probably the first person that really actually had a chance to just lay it out there with, you know? Like, these are the type of things I would tell a therapist if I talked to. I can't tell my mom. I can't go to my mom and be like, hey, I almost got freaking Swiss cheese, man. What do you think of that? You didn't give her a heart attack, dude. Unless it was somebody that was there in Iraq, actually experienced that. You can't really conversate with them. Like, I seen people who didn't even know each other in Iraq, and as soon as they find out he's in Iraq, you're in Iraq, they have like a 2-hour long conversation. You all have something in common. You all got scared together. Like, there was plenty of times. Let me give you an idea. I'm gonna give you a perfect example of why I think everybody who went to Iraq has PTSD. In Iraq, I was sleeping in my bed, and you have your Kevlar, the flak vest, to stop like bullets and stuff. You put it behind your head, like on your bed, just in case. You never know if something hits there. That way it protects your head. Maybe, who knows? But better than nothing. But you're laying in your bed, 3 in the morning, you hear the incoming sound. And you're just looking up at a dark ceiling. And you hear the incoming. And that messes with you. You know, you're so terrified inside that you don't even know you're terrified.
If you could tell everybody in the world one thing, what would it be?
If I could tell anybody one thing in this world, it's love, man. True, like love for one another, and love for all mankind, and womankind. All right, dude. I appreciate you, man. Have a good one and stay safe.
Good evening, and here are the predictions for 2024. Something awful and completely random and out of the blue will happen to Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. Her detractors will be frustrated because they won't be able to say that she brought it all upon herself, while her supporters will be frustrated because they will have no one to blame. The market in non-fungible tokens will experience a sudden rise when someone invents a revolutionary new form of yacht monkey. And then it will collapse when a small boy points out that the emperor is nude. Political commentators will become baffled when one of the main parties admits to trying to capture the centre ground. The other party will then internally bicker over the best way to react. This will lead to at least one of the parties actually coming up with a new stated policy, and the professional commentators, unused to having policies to talk about, will be left silently agape, leaving the debate to happen between ignorant amateurs on YouTube. Elon Musk will launch the world's first fully automated journalist called NewsX. The output of this machine will prove to be more reliably accurate than that of the average human journalist. A rival company will then within weeks launch a second automated journalist, Ybot, which will strongly disagree with over 90% of the output of NewsX. Climate activists will start to refer to the climate apocalypse. They continue to be ignored, and within a few weeks they will give Climageddon a go before quietly going back to climate change. A crowdfunding campaign will raise over £30 million to finance a flat earther expedition to discover the edge of the Earth. This money will then mysteriously disappear. A conspiracy will be suspected. Britain's famous art award, the Turner Prize, will experiment with a public vote for the winner. The winner by a landslide will be the only painting entered that resembles anything recognisable. The judges will overturn the result. Iceland will ban mobile telephones for those under 18. At the same time, it will make them compulsory for all adults, but for all operating systems to display clear health warnings and include a safety cutoff feature which shuts them down if they are used for more than 20 minutes in one day. The rest of the world will await the results with interest and fear. President Vladimir Putin of Russia will suddenly suffer a mysterious stroke, which will kill him. A coalition of senior Russians will show instant and impressive solidarity and replace the status quo with a new man, almost as though they had been prepared for this. The special operation in Ukraine will be declared successfully completed, and Russian forces will withdraw from Ukraine, but not from the Crimea. The world will then hold its breath and wait to see if the Ukrainians want to retake Crimea. A compromise will be sought, but the new Russian regime will turn out to be disappointingly uncompromising. New evidence will come to light that finally proves that Liberace was not gay. A Big Brother-style reality show contestant will be murdered during the show, and the rest of the contestants will remain locked in while police investigate. The show will continue, and it will later transpire that the entire thing was a stunt staged by the production company. South Koreans will indulge in a sudden mass hysterical orgy which leads to a huge surge in the local birth rate. The government will declare the orgy an annually recurring event. Donald Trump will win the USA election, and opponents of his will do something embarrassingly similar to the invasion of the Capitol building of January 2021. An archaeological discovery in Egypt will be dated by scientific means to be far older than the pyramids, and a strong indication of the previous civilization so often postulated in sensationalist television history programs. Later, an error with the first dating will be reported after a contamination of the sample is discovered, and the new date will put the find in line with the standard Egyptian chronology. Conspiracy theorists will then claim that the contamination was faked and will continue to refer to the earlier dating as proof that they were right all along, despite numerous careful repeats of the scientific dating which confirm the later date. A regulation will be passed that compels all films set in historical periods to declare an historical accuracy rating in their credits. The first film to get a rating of over 90% will prove to be a huge hit. The issue will then get complicated when the second film to get over 90% is a flop, and the debate will rage between those who blame the history and those who blame the fact that the film was rubbish. For a 3-day period, the YouTube algorithm will cause the most popular videos all to be about the benefits of underwater carpentry as espoused by suspiciously good-looking Asian women. A Chinese conspiracy will be suspected. The former leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, will prove to be a huge hit when he agrees to play the Dame in a panto in Birmingham. The panto will be filled with political gags and attract boisterous crowds. The Guardian newspaper will send an undercover reporter to review it, and he will write about almost nothing other than that the audience was probably made up of the wrong sort of people who were probably there for the wrong reasons. The run will be extended, but then cancelled by the local council, which cites safety issues as the reason. "It's behind you" and "Oh no, I didn't" will become the main political slogans for the next 3 years. One of the world's main purveyors of ladies' clothing will launch a range of dresses with pockets. Initial sales will be given a boost when several celebrities get pictured wearing them. But still, the range will be a spectacular financial flop. So many explanations will be very forcefully expounded that no one will dare to conclude which of them might be correct. The cryptocurrency Bitcoin will be hacked, and the currency will collapse, which will financially hit the criminal underworld hard, leading to a temporary increase in violent conflict within the world of organized crime and the collapse of 2 South American governments. Suddenly, half the people known by well-to-do types will be buying property in Romania, which will become this year's go-to holiday destination, and everyone will be pretending to know and have known a lot about the country for ages. A new law will come into force in Liechtenstein, which will compel the manufacturers of home computer printers to sell the ink at reasonable rates. Liechtenstein's economy will then skyrocket as it becomes overnight the world's leading exporter of printer ink. In the face of this competition, other countries will soon follow suit. There will be worldwide dancing in the streets, and Ink Day will become the biggest internationally recognized festival. And finally, the winner of the latest thing to be declared very bad for you will be, let's see, we've had milk, bread, gluten, meat, cheese, sugar, green veg, eggs, peanuts, caffeine, fat, cholesterol, potatoes, starch, salt. There isn't much left. It is tomatoes. Tomatoes will be declared very bad for you. Sales of tomatoes will be unaffected. Good night.
Basically saying, why is it that we're here right now? Because of what came before. And what came before that, and so on. It's a deterministic world with all sorts of non-linear, non-additive emergent stuff coming out. It's this myth that if the world is deterministic, nothing can change. This is gibberish.
Of course, makes you very much run against the mainstream. I always think of Jordan Peterson and his advocacy of the sovereign individual, right? So there is this whole kind of, even on the progressive side, there is a very strong insistence on the promotion of sovereign individuality. So that makes you somewhat of a cultural outsider, and that makes it an uphill battle.
Yes, he says this is incredibly hard, but we have done it over and over and over again in history.
A few days ago, I had the extraordinary opportunity to speak to Robert Sapolsky, the biologist, neurologist, anthropologist from Stanford University, who is one of the major scientists today. And he spoke to me about his new book, Determined. I have the printout here, published by Penguin Press. And we'll post this video as soon as the book will be available. It's a wonderful book that argues very effectively from a scientific perspective against a still very dominant notion of free will and what we could call, with Jordan Peterson, sovereign individuality. The main point of the book is to show that human behavior, including the intentions that inform it, is based on biological and other environmental conditions. But the book actually does much more than presenting this claim. It also outlines how not only biological reality, but reality as a whole, including social and psychological reality, unfolds as emerging complexity. Sapolsky argues both for an understanding of reality based on complexity and against the reigning paradigm of free will. In this way, his work connects very well, if I may say, for instance, with Niklas Luhmann's social systems theory and with arguments defending amorality I presented in other videos on this channel. But let's listen to Robert Sapolsky now.
So thank you so much, Professor Sapolsky, for joining me to talk about your book. It's really, really a great honor. I have to say, though, that I didn't read your book out of free will. It was suggested to me by two close friends, Paul D'Ambrosio, who also is my co-author, and my friend Milos Rancic. So they brought me to your work, and I'm really grateful to them for that. The book has a double meaning. The book title has a double meaning, determined, as you say. And the first meaning is basically that human behavior is determined. Maybe you can speak about that first, the first meaning of the title.
Sure. There's obviously been just a few thousand years worth of people fighting over the free will issue. And most of what modern biology is offering is there's a lot less free will than most people assume and that we run our societies on. I happen to be way, way in the lunatic fringe, and that I believe that there's no free will whatsoever. And that's the main argument of the book. And much of what I'm doing in there is trying to go through the nuts and bolts of how we wind up with the brains that we have at this moment. And it's the outcome of influences in biology a second ago, a minute ago, an hour ago, a lifetime ago, a century ago, and so on. And that when you really see the pieces of that come together, there's simply no room for the type of free will that people propose, one which, I'm not trying to sound sarcastic here, but one which requires you invoking magic at some point along the way. And what I try to do in the first half of the book is look at all the contemporary philosophical arguments for free will existing. And these are uniformly compatibilist views. Philosophers who say, yes, 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 I admit the world is made out of atoms and cells and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's all made out of like magic stuff, but somehow here's why you can still have free will amid us being biological machines. And where I think every single one of those approaches has a fatal flaw in it when you know enough of the relevant science. The second half of the book, in a sense, is building on the other way of thinking of the word determined, which is like to apply yourself to a difficult task, which is, essentially, I've believed since I was 14 years old that there's no free will at all. And I'm totally intellectually at peace with that. It's straightforward, it's simple, all of that. But at the same time, I've absolutely no idea how we're supposed to live if everyone stopped believing in free will and how we're supposed to function. And the second half of the book is some very pathetic attempts at getting at what things don't you have to worry about if magically everybody stopped believing in free will, where justice would come from, what the differences would be. And at the end, I conclude that, well, even though it's unimaginably difficult to really live as if you don't believe in free will and to have everybody else doing the same, as people believe less and less in free will, as we understand more the scientific bases of where human behavior is coming from, all that's going to happen is the world is going to become a better, more humane place.
Right. If I might go back to the first meaning of the title, your point that human behavior is basically thoroughly determined. And you're using one core metaphor right at the beginning of the book, the turtles all the way down. Can you say a little bit more about that, maybe?
Okay, it's this obviously made-up story about the philosopher William James, but it could be any philosopher, but it's always some prestigious old white male, is giving a lecture about the nature of the universe. And afterward, this old woman comes up and says, Professor James, you've got it all wrong. The world is actually on the back of a turtle.
Right.
And Professor James is sort of amused and says, oh, but madam, where does that turtle stand? And she says, on top of another turtle. And he says, oh, but madam, where does that turtle stand? And she says, no use, Professor James, it's turtles all the way down.
Right, exactly.
And this is the starting point.
Yes.
Basically, the starting point is, if it's ridiculous when trying to figure out what made us who we are, if it's ridiculous to say it's turtles all the way down, it is way more ridiculous to say instead that somewhere down there is a turtle floating in the air.
Right.
And that's what the free will concept is basically dependent upon.
Right.
At some point, there is a uncaused cause
exactly.
that steps out of all of this.
Right. That's the old Aristotelian conception that's always in there.
Well, you look at various points where people who think about this stuff professionally believe they have come up with an explanation for where a behavior has come from, because of the elevated levels of this hormone, because of this version of this gene, because of, expansion of the neural connections in this part of the brain, some such thing. And what you get to at every one of those points is saying, great, but where did that come from? And where did the thing that came from come from? And it's, this infinite regression of, turtles all the way down, each one having a predecessor, basically saying, why is it that we're here right now? Because of what came before. And what came before that, and so on. And at some point, this gets completely out of control, and we're back to the Big Bang, and that's like, who wants to go anywhere near that? But for my purposes, it's preceding influences back a couple of million years. Explaining why we evolved to be the sort of species we are, back a bunch of centuries, explaining what sort of culture we were raised in, back to when we were just our genome, back to when we were in a womb, and so on. So I don't know if we need to go back to the Big Bang, but when you look at the range of things influencing, shaping who we are, and let's make a mechanistic definition of that, shaping the brain that you have at this instant when you will do or not do some particular behavior, all it is what came before.
Right. Now, this what came before, I think you do a good job in the book as well to explain that this what came before is not just a simple, let's say, chain of causes, but you use the notion of emergent complexity to describe, like, in a more complex way, how behavior is determined, not just by a simple kind of linear line of causes, one cause causing the next.
Yeah. And, for the last 500 years or so, if you wanted to understand how something complicated worked, the strategy was obvious: break it down into its component parts. And understand how those parts work and add them back together. And there you go. And you have reductive knowledge. And that was a fantastic thing because it got rid of belief that things like disease were caused by demons. It's what our modern worldview is built on. But it turns out very, very frequently, the most interesting stuff out there is not best understood at that reductive level of component parts. Because you put enough of those component parts together, and chaoticism means that you're going to get big, complex outcomes that are intrinsically, provably unpredictable. Or you put enough of these elements together, and even though each one is totally simple and straightforward, you put enough of them together, and out emerges things like a cell, or a person, or a society, with all sorts of properties that you can't describe on the level of the component parts. And this is amazing. This is like a fantastic revolution because it shows you it's a deterministic world, but not in the very straight constrained version that's centuries old of its deterministic world that is entirely understandable at the reductive level. It's a deterministic world with all sorts of non-linear, non-additive emergent stuff coming out. Right. And what all sorts of people do when they look at what chaoticism is about or emergent complexity is it's just an irresistible playground to decide, aha, that's where free will is coming from. And it's not.
Right. I think that's very crucial and very important to point out that your notion of determinacy or being determined specifically is not one that operates with predictability. To the contrary, on the one hand, you think that we are determined, but on the other hand, there is also unpredictability. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the everyday version of that is like someone sits there and says, okay, here's these 3 students. Which one of them is going to have a spectacular intellectual career? Which is going to squander all their gifts? Which is going to wind up somewhere in between? And like, you really can't predict that unless you're starting with very extreme cases. You can't predict stuff like that. You can't predict behavior on that level. You can certainly predict it on statistical levels. If a society has a steep economic downturn and loss of a lot of jobs, more men are going to be physically abusing their wives. That's like a universal of criminology kind of thing, but you can't predict very well individually, at which point people say, aha, the unpredictability is the evidence of free will.
Right.
The much more formal way of getting at that is what chaotic systems are about, are ones that start off very simply, and there is absolutely no way, and it could be mathematically proven, there is no way that you could predict what the outcome of the system is going to be once it begins to get sufficiently complex.
Right.
There's no way to tell if you start at A, what X is going to look like, unless you first see how A causes B and B causes C and so on. You have to do every intermediate step. And chaotic systems, that's what they're like. And thus, there's then this so seductive pull at that point. These are systems that are intrinsically unpredictable.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're undetermined. And
exactly.
That's where people make that mistake.
Yes. I think that's a key conceptual idea that runs through the whole book. And I want to go back to that in the second half of the conversation. Just to do the main song and dance again, I want to talk a little bit more about the second half of the book. And I think that's obviously directly connected with the idea of indeterminacy, where you very strongly emphasize the notion of change. That is to say, that, again, being determined shouldn't be confused with that there is no possibility to change, but rather the contrary. So maybe you can say a little bit about this part as well.
Exactly. I would say like the 3 building blocks of people freaking out at the notion that there's no free will, the 3 sort of approachable building blocks, and then the one that's like deeply existential. The first one is this myth that if the world is deterministic, nothing can change. This is gibberish. And when you actually look at the biology of how change occurs, not only does it prove that change occurs, but it shows even more mechanistically how the world works. The second one that immediately comes up is, oh my God, you're just going to have like people running amok because everyone is going to decide they can't be held responsible for anything at all. And you'll have no way of controlling dangerous people. And yeah, you get rid of the criminal justice system in its entirety, which I think is the only intellectual and moral outcome of viewing us as having no free will. That doesn't mean you let dangerous people run around on the streets. You have a car whose brakes don't work and you keep it off the streets, but you don't preach to the car about it has a rotten soul for doing this. So I think that's sort of the second area that has to be unpacked. What are the approaches we could take to subtracting out a sense of responsibility for some of the worst things that people can do and make the world not only a safer place, but a more humane one? And we've been doing that time and time again over centuries. Just keep doing it. I would say the third one where people get caught up with stuff in this determined second sense of the worst definition is most people who say, yeah, the world is made of atoms, but there's free will, draw this completely false dichotomy. We have our attributes, our eye color, how tall we are, whether we're going to have a good memory span for numbers, whether we're going to have an artistic sense, whether we're going to have a strong propensity towards empathy, whether any of that stuff is biological. That's the stuff we're born with. Those are our basic attributes. And here winds up being this disastrous leap into this belief that what isn't biological is, what do you do with those traits? Do you work hard to overcome your lack of natural gifts? Do you squander your talents? Do you show self-discipline? Are you self-indulgent? That's the real stuff that measures who we are as people. And it is this completely irrational belief that, like, being able to have perfect pitch as a musician, that's made of biology. But practicing a lot to get really good on your instrument, that's made of different stuff. That's made of fairy dust. So those are the three. And when you look at where does self-control come from and why are some of us better at it than others and where do all that, it's made of the same biology stuff, often of a very different quality as all the other features contributing to making us who we are.
On the basis of this, I'd like to do a few terminological clarifications, perhaps. The first one is going back to this kind of determinism that you're arguing in favor of. And as we said earlier, you distinguish between a determinism that is just completely determined, where also the future is determined, that comes along with predictability. And then you'd like to distinguish this from a second kind of determinism where the future remains open, that includes unpredictability. Now, I was wondering if this second kind of determinism, which is the determinism that you are advocating, could also be expressed with the notion of contingency, because the notion of contingency, on the one hand, also implies being dependent on previous conditions, but it also implies an open future, a number of possibility, let's say a number of options that could all follow from the present state. So wouldn't that make sense to call this specific notion or this specific determinism that you defend a determinism that operates with a notion of contingency?
Absolutely. That's exact context. And what you see is at every point where what you have turned out to be, where there's a juncture where if you go this way, you're going to wind up being one type of person, and you go that way and you wind up being another. And the contingency makes one of those more likely than another. This is chance. This is luck. And you have to say, did you have anything to do with that being the outcome? Just one example of this. And the last thing I want to be doing here is overemphasizing the importance of genes, because they're important, but they're embedded in all this other stuff. Blah, blah, is there's a particular gene. It's got to do with a neurotransmitter in the brain called serotonin. This gene comes in a few different flavors. And what a lot of lab research with lab animals showed is if you have one particular version of this gene, you're more predisposed towards aggression. towards violence.
Right.
Whoa, let's look at that in humans. This is incredibly important. And what you see is these amazing studies following people from birth up until early adulthood and knowing what their genetic makeup is and looking at this. And you ask this question, okay, if you have this bad version of this gene, are you likely to have a history of violence by the time you're 25 years old?
Right.
And the answer is yes, absolutely yes, if and only if you were abused as a child.
Right.
In other words, that's exactly the contingent moment that determines that. There's a contingent moment somewhere in there. If somebody has a particular profile of testosterone in their bloodstream and the way their brain responds to testosterone, where the outcome is someone who is very prone towards violence and has committed a couple of murders. And in a different set of contingencies, this is someone who would be an aggressive son of a bitch in how they play chess.
Mm. Exactly. Yes.
Different splits in the road. So absolutely, it's all about contingencies.
Right. And I think it's important to clarify this because I think the contingency notion highlights the unpredictability of the future, as well as the multiplicity of causes. And that brings me to a second question, that the turtles all the way down image somehow suggests that it's really like one turtle below another, whereas probably the image that you're actually presenting is much more complex, that we have lots of turtles, and it's not just one line of turtles. It's a very kind of, not even a pyramid, a whole kind of tree of turtles there.
Yeah,
and it really depends basically on the line that the scientist goes, which turtles he or she identifies as being even below or on top of the other, where kind of on which turtle is kind of interest to the scientist. But again, of course, I fully agree with you. Wherever we look and whichever line we take, we always just find more turtles. We never find actually free will. So I would completely agree with you. However, the image again of the turtles all the way down somehow suggests again like something like a causal chain. That's why a second terminological qualification or modification I'd like to ask about, if it would make sense to speak instead of causes, to speak of conditions, and to speak of conditioning instead of causing, specifically in order to avoid the reductionist conceptual framework.
Absolutely. Contingency, context, dependency, modulating the likelihood of different outcomes. Absolutely. And like, you're absolutely right. It can't be one turtle down. In fact, it's an exponentially more complicated branching tree as you go down there. And one of the most interesting things out there for evolutionary biologists, for criminology, et cetera, is the phenomenon of convergence. There's lots of circumstances where you can start in two different places and you could wind up like plants from two different sides of the planet living in particularly strange extreme ecosystems wind up looking exactly the same, even though they haven't had a shared relative in like 200 million years or so. Convergence like that is part of the whole story, but just because you can't tell which of the two possible preceding contingencies gave rise to the same thing, that doesn't mean that nothing gave rise to them.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it's a less deterministic world.
I'd like to ask another terminological question. As we said earlier, you're talking about emergent complexity rather than a chain of causes. Your model is not an Aristotelian model, but your model is a model of emergent complexity. Now, I have very little background in biology, but I'm more influenced by the social theory of Niklas Luhmann, who takes from biology the concept of autopoiesis. Now, I was wondering, when you were writing about emergent complexity, I was always reading autopoiesis. So I was wondering if that, number one, if that's correct, or and if so, is that term no longer being used, or?
No, I think all we've got here is like we're living in different disciplines, and it's pretty much the same concept. And in like the mathematically minded biologists, they talk about self-organizing systems.
Right.
Chemists talk about that a lot, especially people talking about the origins of life. You get enough pieces and there's a whole bunch of ways in which things self-organize. Yeah, for my world, it's called self-organizing stuff or emergent systems. And it's totally wonderful stuff because it tells you something about how entire colonies of ants do amazing things, whereas a single ant is pretty useless. It tells you how an entire collection of neurons does amazing things, even if a single one is useless. And what's most amazing is it's some of the same rules by which a bunch of little stupid ants and a bunch of stupid little neurons produce wildly complex adaptive things at the top end. It's the same rules in all of these systems. So it's totally great. But I think all we're doing here is seeing in your social science world, that's the term that's used, autopoiesis.
Right.
I'm fairly sure I have never heard a biologist use the word, but whatever, it's the same concept.
Okay, we stick with emergent complexity, but as you said, and you corrected yourself, you do this also. You did do this also in the book. You say everything is biological, and then you say no, it's not just biological. It's both biological and the environment. And then by environment, you refer to cultural factors, to social factors, to biological factors, to historical factors, right? That all factor in. And that are also turtles, that are also among the wide range of turtles that are all influencing behavior, that all condition behavior in one way or another. Now, my question is: can we also would you allow to speak of emergent complexity, not just with regard to biological phenomena, which is what you are mostly studying, but also with regard to social and psychological phenomena? Could we also have a psychology or a sociology that is based on the notion of emergent complexity?
Completely.
Yeah.
Look at people like Jared Diamond with these enormous large views about how empires and city-states and all of that emerge and why they collapse and what are some of the patterns and what does it have to do with ecology, which some people have decided he overstated the role of ecological disaster in driving some empires into extinction. But that's an example of the rules. Cultures become who they are. It's not by chance that, people, here's an example that I love. In China, Southeast China is dominated by rice farming, and that's highly collectivist. I'm sure you know better than me by now, but like the whole village turns out to plant the seeds for somebody's field. And the next day they all go and plant somebody else's field. And 4 months later, they harvest everything in the old days. And all the time they're using an irrigation system that's 1,000 years old, that's being maintained by 50 cooperative villages. Right. And then you go look up in the north, and I understand zero about any of this farming stuff, but apparently you don't grow rice there, you grow wheat, which is a much more solitary picture. And these incredible studies, people from the wheat growing regions have a more individualistic mindset than people from the rice growing. People from the wheat growing regions are more likely to file for a patent for an invention. They're more likely to get divorced. When you put an obstacle in their path, they are more likely to break up the obstacle rather than go around it.
Right. But then again, isn't it a little bit dangerous to make this kind of a monocausal explanation, that you say people are more individualistic because of these specific social circumstances, the way they grow plants. Isn't it the case, if we, as you just said, take emergent complexity as a feature of biological systems as well as of social systems, as well as maybe of psychological systems, that they all condition one another? That just as we can't have a reductionism that ends up with only biology at the bottom, we should also be aware of a reductionism that ends up with only sociology as the bottom. I mean, the model of emergent complexity shouldn't be reduced to one kind of sphere of causes that then becomes causal. I mean, if
Absolutely.
there is emergent complexity, they all mutually condition one another.
Absolutely. There's no starting point in these circles of influences.
Right.
And the thing about feedback loops, recursive ones, is that they are both downstream and upstream of whatever it is you're studying, because that's the essence of it. No, absolutely. And, here's an example that's just kind of cool. There was a famous study published a few years ago, very prestigious journal, looking at judges on parole boards.
Yeah, that's
do they let the
Yes.
person go? Do they send him back to jail? And it turns out a huge predictor is the longer a judge has gone without eating a meal, the more likely they are to have a harsh assessment of the prisoner. For starters, there's been a lot of challenges to this study, some of them statistical, and my take is that the authors have responded adequately to every single one of those charges, and this is totally solid, and other replications have come in since then. Okay, but at least you have this observation, wow, as judges get more hungry, they get more punitive. And there's all sorts of models built around that having to do with glucose and getting into your brain and how well your brain is working, all of that. So yeah, this is a rule. But then you see a circumstance where the hungrier a judge gets, the more kind and forgiving they are. What's this about? This is, you do the same study in a Muslim country during Ramadan. And why are you hungry during Ramadan, during the daylight hours? Because this is a chance of deep spiritual reflection, and your judges there become more forgiving as the day goes by during Ramadan. Oh, okay. So, whoa, something having to do with like some nomadic guy in the Mideast in the 7th century is going to explain. Whoa. Yes, exactly. So it's lots and lots of causes, and which in passing is one reason why people have a lot of trouble seeing that there's no free will there. You get somebody whose brain has been destroyed by a car accident. People are pretty good at knowing the person is not in control of their behavior. But when who the person is right now is the outcome of 1,000 different microscopic influences, half of which we can't detect, half of which haven't been discovered yet, that's much harder to see. All of these had converged just as powerfully as a single massive event.
Right. I mean, if we admit that there are these, as you just outlined, they're not just biological conditions, there are also social conditions, and there are also psychological conditions, right? So there seems to be, without bringing in free will, which I'm not intending to do, but there are also, and you talk about in your book a lot as well, there are nevertheless also psychological conditions at work. And these might be involved also in the potential for change, in the sense that there's also this component of conditioning, this component of turtles that is tied to mental operations. And I wonder if these mental operations, thoughts, rational thoughts, feelings, and so forth, that the traditional argument is, in the Western tradition, at least, that we should draw the bottom line there. And that's how the free will argument is usually built, right? That this is the most important and the most fundamental cause where we at least should get to. But this is, and you argue against it, but just to make this clear, I think on the one hand, you're not trying to replace, which may be a way people may sometimes misunderstand you, this with a thorough biological determinism, because as you just said, there are many other conditions as well at work, and there are mutual feedback mechanisms. But you also, if I understand you correctly, and that's again where maybe the change element comes in, don't want to deny that among the conditioning elements, the mutually conditioning elements, are also intellectual and rational and psychological turtles. They're also there. They belong to the realm of turtles as well.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'm doing here is saying, oh, ultimately it's all biological. Biology is destined to swallow up psychology, and as long as we're at it, political science and poetry and everything. No, biology, when it comes to behavior, biology and psychology are simply two different words to describe how easy is it to access what's going on in there. Sometimes, like, you want to understand why somebody has wound up with a different faith than their parents and of a particular type, reflecting a philosophy that appealed to them. Yeah, you could try to figure out that with neurons and emergent neuronal but you're going to be much more successful. It's easier to understand from a psychological perspective. And sometimes you're trying to make sense of somebody who is constantly afraid of things that other people do not see as threatening. And in that case, it's simply more convenient, more understandable, more effective therapeutically to instead try to understand the pharmacology of anxiety. But it's the same exact thing in both cases. Absolutely inseparable. And, I just happen to get trained that it's easier for me to frame a lot of this stuff in terms of biology. And sometimes I'm framing it in a very clumsy way, because I'm not trained in realizing this one is actually much better described from the psychological perspective, but it's one and the same.
Right. I mean, the traditional philosophical arguments for free will that you are forcefully arguing against still are somehow rooted in this Western tradition that the mind should somehow be in control, that it is up to the psychological, the soul, basically, to assume control and to be that condition that conditions all the other conditions. Whereas your argument is basically that is impossible because we have emergent complexity where all these different turtles are constantly mutually conditioning and changing one another. So it is completely illusionary to assume that one of these instances can be in control, right? And if I understood you correctly, that's also the major flaw with the traditional free will arguments, that they somehow assume that there is some form of nexus, some form of kind of spot where the spirit, the mind, the soul, free will can somehow take control of the rest of what constitutes human experience or constitutes the person. Is it correct that you try to undermine, from a biological perspective, the existence of such a nexus, such a point where by the mind could exercise control over the biology of a human being? Is that correct?
Yes, and just to really get in some people's faces, if I'm having a discussion with someone who believes in free will, and in order for them to explain where free will comes from, if they use the word soul, I got nothing more to say to them. And at that point, we should talk about what are the good Indian restaurants in the neighborhood or something like that, because that is just a starting point. But what you allude to here is this broader sense of there's no place to squeeze in free will.
Right.
There's one misconception about this whole, when you study neurobiology and endocrinology and child development and genes and culture and all of that, you see there's no free will. The notion is what you're doing there is, you try to explain the world just with neurobiology and say there's no free will. And a skeptic says, what about that? You can't explain that yet. And you say, that's awkward. You're right. We can't. But endocrinology has an answer to that, but they can't explain that. But fortunately, social anthropology says that each of these disciplines has a hole in the argument that's then covered up by one of the other. That's not it in the slightest.
Right.
What it is it's one discipline.
Right.
If you were talking about genetics, you were talking about evolution, how those genes evolved.
Right.
If you're talking about genetics, you were talking about when those genes are active, and you're talking about environment and epigenetic effects on gene regulation. If you were talking about genetics, you were talking about what proteins are in what part of your brain right now this afternoon.
Right.
It's all one discipline. And when you see this arc of these unbroken influences, there isn't a crack anywhere in there to shoehorn in a homunculus who's made of magic stuff that violates all this.
And yet, you argue for change. And actually, as you write in your book from time to time, you even want to change people's minds. So there is, I think, while there is no nexus, while there is no soul, while there is no control agent, and specifically not a mental control agent, at the same time, like ideas, for instance, thought, also conditions social circumstances, and that in turn can have an effect on biology, as you also explained earlier with several examples. So I think that's important to highlight, right? That at least if I understood you correctly, that your argument doesn't undermine the fact that people also think, and that also ideas have a certain conditioning effect, for instance, on social, on the emergence of social configurations, and vice versa, right? It's just not in a way where kind of one-way control can be exerted.
Absolutely. An example I use in the book, it's getting dated now, but the movie Hotel Rwanda from years ago about that one incredibly heroic man who saved like 1,000 people's lives during the Rwandan genocide. And you watch that movie and you are so inspired, and you are so inspired, perhaps, to decide you want to learn about the Bosnian genocide or the Armenian genocide, or you are so inspired that you find yourself thinking afterward, wow, one person can make a difference in the world. And there was nothing special about this guy before. Maybe I can as well. Or you're so inspired by what you viewed as like a sentimental, emotionally manipulative script that you want to become a movie critic and say, this is a terrible movie because all it does is manipulate your... Why at those junctures? Why those different outcomes? Because you went into that moment with different sorts of brains.
Not free will. You might have, and again, it wasn't even if you decided by your own free will to go to that movie, you couldn't decide what's going to happen by you watching the movie. So it's always an unpredictable effect of that, what we expose ourselves to, right? And then you can even say whatever. If someone convinces you about free will, then you believe in free will because you're conditioned by that person who conditioned you to believe in free will, because maybe it's your culture that you are born into, which is a culture that very strongly prioritizes free will. So your very notion of free will, of course, is also determined, is caused, is conditioned by a specific environment that you find yourself in. Now, I think another, maybe my favorite metaphor of the whole book is this here. You write one sentence, page 386. We are not captains of our ships. Our ships never had captains. So this metaphor of the captain, for me, is a metaphor of the self, right? A metaphor of the self that can exert self-control and so forth, right? So that seems to me at the bottom of the argument against free will, which again I agree with. That in order to have free will, basically what's behind the argument of free will is that free will is somehow either constitutes or is based in selfhood. Yes. So isn't the argument against free will basically an argument against the notion of a self?
Absolutely. We have this construct that we call our conscious selves, and all sorts of very smart neurobiologists have been trying to figure out how consciousness works. And about once every 10 years or so, I force myself to read one of their review papers to see how the field is doing. And the field has not made a whole lot of progress. These are constructs, but this is a myth. There is no blueprint. There is no blueprint maker. And this not only refers to perhaps the lack of a homunculus being the blueprint maker in your head, but the lack of an omnipotent blueprint maker making the universe kind of thing. And you can see exactly where I would run with that. You look at ants, and they will do something adaptive and optimal. They'll figure out what the best place is to put a new colony based on what different scouts report. There is no ant that ever has information about more than one place.
Right.
There's nobody in charge who could sit there and weigh the options and make an executive decision. The optimal answer just emerges. In the exact same way, when you were wiring up your brain, there is no point there where something is deciding if you have had enough neuronal connections made to this part of the brain, and let's have those neurons go left instead of right at this street crossing and connect to that part of the brain instead. There's no comparator, there's no decision maker, there's no captains.
Right.
These things simply emerge.
Yeah, but this, of course, makes you very much run against mainstream both cultural and intellectual presuppositions, especially, of course, in North America, in the United States, which is very much, I always think of Jordan Peterson and his advocacy of the sovereign individual, right? So there is this whole kind of contemporary, still very strong North American insistence on sovereign individuality. And this can be like Peterson from a conservative side, but even on the progressive side, there is a very strong insistence on the promotion of sovereign individuality. So that makes you somewhat of a cultural outsider, or am I right in that?
Yeah, I sure anticipate that that's going to be exactly the outcome of this book, because I've been yelling about this to people, as I said, for 50 years. And it's exactly that same response. Ironically, I actually had a 3-hour podcast a few weeks ago with Jordan Peterson about these issues.
Wow.
And
I didn't know. Yeah.
Whoa, he was fun and interesting to talk to.
Already published?
He's going to post it, I think, around the same week that the book is published next month.
Okay.
Whoa, was that interesting? Whoa, was he fun to talk to? Whoa, does he have a different view of the world than I do?
Yes.
But nonetheless, that was great. But he is the epitome of that sense that not only do we have agency, but even if we didn't, you shouldn't tell people that we don't have it, because the best of what we produce is driven by the sense of us being captains of ships, and we're not, and there's no captains.
This brings me to maybe the last thing. I like this. I mean, you're mostly referring to analytic philosophy, but my background is much more German and continental philosophies and Asian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, which has a much, much weaker insistence on the sovereign individual. And one of my favorite authors is Friedrich Nietzsche. And when reading your book, I often thought about this one half-famous sentence from Twilight of the Idols. And he says that we won't get rid of God as long as we believe in grammar. because he's talking about the influence on the subject-object construction in Western grammar, and that very much language also emphasizes the subject and subjectivity. And agency, right? You can just think about the sentence, it rains. That's something I always like to refer to, right? Even when, with regard to raining, we somehow need grammatically to ascribe an agent, a subject who reigns, right? It rains, right?
Yes.
And so this is, I think, the background of why he says we won't get rid of God as long as we believe in grammar. So maybe we can say, we won't get rid of the idea of free will, or we won't get rid of the idea of the sovereign individual as long as we speak English.
Quite possibly. And like all sorts of realms of like anthrolinguistics, look at how you think very differently in different languages. I mean, this is Sapir-Whorf. This is a concept that's been around for like a century now. And people
it's been criticized strongly as well.
Plenty, and supported plenty. And like, if you have someone where what they can say is, oh, that other person is right in front of me, that's going to be a very different worldview than in language groups where you would say that person who is just downhill from that tree.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is, I think the uphill battle, on the one hand, you're fighting an uphill battle, let's say, against the culture of the sovereign individual. But I think the hill is even steeper, because you need to use English language, and you need to use words such as determined, and you need to use words such as cause, and so forth. And you need to use a grammar which always suggests agency. And so that's also an impression that I had, that you're also, to an extent, fighting against the language that you inherited and that you have to use to express your ideas. Or am I wrong?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And we say, I chose to do this because that's way more convenient than saying circumstances from a second ago to a million years ago led me to be changed in a way such that this is what I'm doing now. Right. I think maybe on a larger level, what you're saying is this is going to be really hard. This is going to be very difficult. And something that I'm almost like evangelical about by now is, yes, this is incredibly hard, but we have done it over and over and over again in history. Right. At one point, we thought lightning storms were caused by witches.
Right.
And then we managed to subtract that out of a notion of responsibility in the world. And society didn't fall apart. It became more humane. Right. And at some point, we figured out that mothers don't cause schizophrenia out of some sort of Freudian garbage going on in their heads. And no, it's a neurogenetic disorder. And the world didn't fall apart. It became vastly more. At some point, we figured out there are some people, no matter how much they try, they are going to be very, very overweight, not because they lack self-discipline, but because they've got a weird gene variant of a receptor for one hormone. And as soon as that's recognized, we're able to subtract responsibility out of that concept, and the world runs better at that point. Right. We've done it over and over and over again, and all we have to do is push ourselves to keep doing that in the next realm where that comes up.
Yes, and then hope for the best.
Exactly.
Yes.
This episode sponsored by Brilliant. Learn to think. Let me tell you about New Caledonian crows. Now, I'm not talking about the old Caledonian crows. Those ones were idiots. No, the New Caledonian crows live on a group of islands called New Caledonia. Must be named after the crows. One thing that New Caledonia has plenty of is wood, but what they don't have is woodpeckers. And that means there are plenty of insects and insects' larvae living in that wood that have not been pegged. And these are perfectly good snacks for a bird that might have at them. However, for the crow, the girth of their beakedness, as well as a distaste for smashing their heads repeatedly into things, has no doubt driven them into a certain cleverness. New Caledonian crows may not have suitable peckers, but what they do have is crow sticks. These crows have figured out how to use sticks to fish around for grubs and other things that have burrowed into logs and branches. Now, this by itself isn't that much of an achievement. Old Caledonian crows use sticks, but all they did with them was poke each other in the butt. I mean, it was funny. They were voted most fun crow the year they figured that out. Then they all starved to death. Anyway, when they're young, New Caledonian crowlets learn how to make and use sticks from their parents and other adult crows. Here, the one in the middle is the baby, and you can see the adult on the left leave a stick for the young one to take a turn with. But it isn't just about finding the right size stick and sticking it in a hole. These crow sticks are often shaped in a very specific way. I mean, before we even get to sticks, you can see what they do with the leaves of the pandanus. On the right there, you can see a tear started by a crow, but what they're really up to is making these. The one on the left is a sort of basic instrument that takes advantage of the serrated edge of the leaf. The one on the right, though, is made by a different group of crows and is more of a complex Swiss Army knife. You got something for any hole. Now, these leaf tools are well and good, but if you want to make yourself a crow stick, it's going to depend on what you need it for. Listen, if all you're going to do is poke a spider, and we've all been there, I'm not going to try to sell you a fancy crow stick. All you need is something that puts some distance between you and said spider when you poke it. And listen, you don't need the top-of-the-line stick to hunt for the larvae of wood-boring beetles. No, the trick with those is you keep poking them in the head with whatever you got. Eventually, they just bite the end of the stick and you can pull them right out. But if you're going after something that doesn't just bite the end of a stick and has wedged itself all up in some tree cranny, then you need yourself a fancy crow stick. And let me tell you, that's a process. First, you have to cut yourself a little section off a plant. Now, it doesn't look like much, but the location of these first cuts are crucial. And that's because not every crow stick is a straight shaft. Many of them have a hook on the end. One way they make these hooks is first finding a fork in the stem of a plant. From there, you can see this one cuts one of the branches right above the joint, and then the next cut is on the stem right below the joint. All right, this one seems to be having a little trouble with that cut. But here, you can see how those two cuts leave you with roughly a hook shape. There's a more boss way to do it, which this one's demonstrating. You just grab one of the branches above the joint and tug on it really hard. Apparently, if you do it right, you get that hook shape without all the cutting. Anyway, once they've gotten to this point, it's time to clean things up a bit. Remove any extra twigs or leaves that might be in the way. But often these crows will also strip the bark off the business end of that stick. And this might have a couple benefits. First, it makes it smoother so there's less friction when you use it. But it also makes it lighter in color, so the crow can see what's going on down in the hole. And seeing what they're doing is quite important for these crows. New Caledonian crows have these large forward-facing eyes. This means there's a greater area of binocular vision, where what the right eye and left eye can see overlap. In addition, these crows have beaks that are fairly straight instead of being curved downward, and this means that unlike their close relatives, if they grab a tool with their beak, it will be in the area where they have binocular vision. Now, they can hold their crow stick in a few different ways. For a very small hole, they might hold it off to the side. That way you can get at least one eye really close. But what they often do is point it forward but sort of hold it on one side, bracing the back on their cheek, and having it face forward gives them more options to see what's going on. And this is what the last step in making a crow stick is all about. The crow bends the shaft so there's a nice curve in it, which helps them keep that hook tip where they can focus on it. And that right there is a damn good crow stick. And the crows know it too. When they make fine hook tools like that, they don't just leave them around willy-nilly. Here's a camera angle that you don't see all that often, outside of pornography and crow research, apparently. Anyway, science hippies put a camera on the bird's tail feathers so they could see how they're using these tools close up. After they use a high-value tool, one that they put a little elbow grease into, they hold on to it with their little feet while they eat. But come on, old Caledonian crows could make hooks too, but they would put the hook end in their mouths and pretend they were caught fish. Voted best impression of a fish in Crow magazine that year. And then they all exploded. Jerry, I thought you said they starved to death. Oh, because they were exploded. No, Jerry, not being able to eat because you've been exploded is not a cause of death. Never mind. Listen, if you want to get smart like a crow bee, there's a free and easy way to learn about math, science, and computer science on Brilliant. There's thousands of interactive lessons to choose from. You can go for the fundamentals like measurement and how to take complex problems and simplify them into something more manageable. Or you can learn how all that technology around you actually works, from how your data is stored to how your cell phone figures out what location you're at. Brilliant.org does a great job of customizing content to your interests and your skill level. You can go at your own pace, and if you ever get stuck, there's hints and step-by-step solutions to get you back on track. If you're curious about programming, try out the course Thinking in Code. It's a fun way to get a feel for how code works without having to be an expert. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/ZayFrank or click on the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. And you'll be supporting a brand that helps make this show possible. Try Brilliant today. Where were we? Oh, right. Perhaps more impressive than making these tools in the wild to hunt for grubs and such is this crow's ability to use the idea of a hook to solve a new problem. Here there's a bucket of food with a handle on it down a tube. The crow is given a straight metal stick, and watch what it does with it. Bends the metal and then pulls that bucket right out. So I guess the question is, how smart are these little f***ers? And how do you figure out what those little noggins are capable of? I mean, at this rate, they're going to steal all of our tiny buckets. Won't have anything to put your weed in. First off, it's not just all about hooks. They're very good at selecting the right tool for a job, the right length or diameter, and if it's not right, they'll modify it. In this case, it means thinning out a stick so it can be fit through a hole to push a little cup off a ledge. And there you have it, all that work paid off. Now it's time to, that one's the even smarter crow. But what about multi-step problems? In this case, the food is pushed way back in that front tube there, which comes equipped with a woefully short stick. Betty, that's her name, has to use the short stick to get a medium stick, and then a medium stick to get a long stick. And only then, when she's trying to figure out how she ended up in this escape room/restaurant, can she eat her food. Anyway, straight A's for Betty. Now this crow, Pierre, same challenge, but he tries to skip a step, trying to use the shortest tool to get the longest tool. When that doesn't work, he gets pissed off and flies away, only to come back with a natural stick he found, which is the right size to get the long stick. Honestly, I don't know which one I'd hire. I mean, Betty certainly listens better, but Pierre's got some pluck. But in this one, they can always see all the tools that are available. What happens when they can't? So in this restaurant, the food comes out if you drop a stone into that tube. Luckily, around the corner, there's a stone, but it's pushed way back inside another tube. Keep going and you find basically the same thing, except this time it has a stick in it, also out of reach. This one's a curveball meant to distract the crow. You don't need it because around the corner, there's a stick lying right in the open. Once it finds that, it knows exactly what to do. Take the stick to the stone and the stone to the food, while it ignores the unnecessary stick-in-a-tube distraction, so it seems like they can keep track of those steps in their head. Kerplunk, num-nums. And they tried this all sorts of different ways, changing the order of things, adding distractions and shortcuts, and the crows were able to hold it all in their heads and come up with the right solution. And if you think these crows are getting a little pissed off having to go through all this hoopla, think again. They seem to get some intrinsic pleasure out of using tools that goes beyond the food reward. After using a tool, they become more optimistic, and this could be a key to why they keep figuring new shit out. Like if you give them parts that fit together, they can build new compound tools. In this scenario, the sticks they're given are too short, but along with those sticks, there's parts of syringes scattered around, like the tubes and the plungers. It's like Venice Beach. And without being shown, these crows figured out how to put these pieces together to create a long enough tool. But what if they're really just good at sticks and don't really understand cause and effect, for example? One question is whether they can use their smarts to figure out new tools in situations they're not used to. There's an Aesop's fable about a crow that uses pebbles to raise the water level in a pitcher. And New Caledonian crows do seem to learn how to do this to raise a bit of food floating in a tube. Now, to see if the crow really understood what was happening, they tried a few things. For example, giving them a wider tube and then an easier-to-fill narrow tube to see which one they'd go for. They gave him an option of a tube filled with sand, I guess to weed out the idiots. Oh, and this one's interesting. They had a setup where one of the outside tubes is connected to a center tube, but out of sight under the table. And the crow had to figure out which tube to put the rocks in. Anyway, the results of all this seem to be a mixed bag. These crows can certainly learn how to use new tools for new goals, but they might just be using trial and error without having a real understanding. So they can do quite a bit solo. What about working together? Alright, so you separate two crows, but you put a box thing between them. One crow has to pass a stone under a fence to another crow. That crow then drops the stone into a hole, and then they both get food. Not a problem. Now we'll mix it up a bit. In this one, that first crow can make a choice. It can use its stone to get a lower value treat, dog food, or it can pass the stone over to collaborate and get the good stuff. And look at that, they choose the good stuff. Problem is, even if there's no second crow to pass the stone to, they often still try to pass the stone anyways. I mean, nobody wants to eat dog food. Ravens, also in the crow family, can learn to pull on strings together to get treats. And they can learn to wait for each other and have preferences on who they want to collaborate with first. And during all these experiments, the crows are studying the people too. And if you're a crow, they'll remember. In this one, for example, the crow is trained to go get a piece of bread and then exchange it for a piece of cheese. But then they introduce a new person who totally reneges on the deal. Look at that, pops the cheese into their own mouth. It's so cold. Anyway, given a choice, even a month later, that crow won't make any more cheese deals with that person. And neither should you. I mean, it makes sense. In the wild, these birds have to navigate some complex social scenes. And that starts with good communication. And they've got good hardware for it. A syrinx, which looks like a failed prototype of a condom. But this is some real deal equipment that lets them do all sorts of things. Communicate with each other, with birds of other species. And listen, members of the crow family are excellent mimics.
You say, hi. Hi. You alright? You alright? You alright?
So with all these abilities, what are they up to? What are they talking about, right? Well, let's have a look at this charming scene. All right, this one here is Red. She's the dominant female carrion crow in this joint. So she makes a call to this one over here, whose codename is Yellow. Yellow responds, has a little head bob, but then listen to Red. All right, the science hippies hadn't heard this sound before, but apparently it's some mafia-level shit, because after that, Red and Yellow team up on another bird, chasing it around and eventually pinning it on the ground and pecking at it. Another bird, a bystander, is all freaked out and tries to stop it, but unfortunately the next morning the victim is dead. And this happens in the wild too. A dominant crow will recruit others to get rid of the competition. Now when a crow dies or is found dead, it's a whole thing. You're right, Jerry, this one does look exploded. Now in this shot, a science hippie has put a dead preserved crow on the ground. This dead crow is unknown to the local crows, but they all come to check it out. Sometimes it's referred to as a funeral but brain scans have shown that the part of their brain that lights up is the decision-making part. They're trying to figure out what happened. It's not a funeral. Oh, all right, the one seems to be having its way with the corpse. And then there's one doing it with that crow. All right. But anyways, you can see it's not a funeral. I mean, at least not like the kind I've been to. I mean, I'm open to... No, actually, I'm not. I mean, it would really change the decision-making around an open casket, wouldn't it? I mean, the old Caledonian crows, they had some funerals. Like the real deal, voted best funerals. And then they were all donged to death. Jerry, what does that even mean, donged to death? Will I assume being hit by a dong? Oh, many dongs. No, I'm not challenging you. I just haven't heard of it. Wait, did this also happen after they'd been exploded? Jerry, once something's been exploded, nothing that happens after is the cause of death. No, not even being hit by a dong. Not even a crow's dick.
The Way of Initiation by Rudolf Steiner. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Forward. The Personality of Rudolf Steiner and His Development by Edward Schuré. Many of even the most cultivated men of our time have a very mistaken idea of what is a true mystic and a true occultist. They know these two forms of human mentality only by their imperfect or degenerate types, of which recent times have afforded but too many examples. To the intellectual man of the day, the mystic is a kind of fool and visionary who takes his fancies for facts. The occultist is a dreamer or a charlatan who abuses public credulity in order to boast of an imaginary science and of pretended powers. Be it remarked, to begin with, that this definition of mysticism, though deserved by some, would be as unjust as erroneous if one sought to apply it to such personalities as Joachim del Fiore of the 13th century, Jacob Boehm of the 16th, or Saint Martin, who was called the unknown philosopher of the 18th century. No less unjust and false would be the current definition of the occultist if one saw in it the slightest connection with such earnest seekers as Paracelsus, Mesmer, or Fabre d'Olivet in the past, as William Crookes, Desrochers, or Camille Flammarion in the present. Think what we may of these bold investigators, it is undeniable that they have opened out regions unknown to science and furnished the mind with new ideas. No, these fanciful definitions can at most satisfy that scientific dilettantism which hides its feebleness under a supercilious mask to screen its indolence, or the worldly skepticism which ridicules all that threatens to upset its indifference. But enough of these superficial opinions. Let us study history, the sacred and profane books of all nations, and the last results of experimental science. Let us subject all these facts to impartial criticism, inferring similar effects from identical causes, and we shall be forced to give quite another definition of the mystic and the occultist. The true mystic is a man who enters into full possession of his inner life, and who, having become cognizant of his subconsciousness, finds in it, through concentrated meditation and steady discipline, new faculties and enlightenment. These new faculties and this enlightenment instruct him as to the innermost nature of his soul and his relations with that impalpable element which underlies all, with that eternal and supreme reality which religion calls God, and poetry the divine. The occultist, akin to the mystic, but differing from him as a younger from an elder brother, is a man endowed with intuition and with synthesis, who seeks to penetrate the hidden depths and foundations of nature by the methods of science and philosophy. That is to say, by observation and reason, methods invariable in principle, but modified in application by being adapted to the descending kingdoms of spirit or the ascending kingdoms of nature, according to the vast hierarchy of beings and the alchemy of the creative word. The mystic, then, is one who seeks for truth and the divine directly within himself, by a gradual detachment and a veritable birth of his higher soul. If he attains it after prolonged effort, he plunges into his own glowing center. Then he immerses himself and identifies himself with that ocean of life which is the primordial force. The occultist, on the other hand, discovers, studies, and contemplates this same divine outpouring given forth in diverse portions, endowed with force, and multiplied to infinity in nature and in humanity. According to the profound saying of Paracelsus, he sees in all beings the letter of an alphabet, which, united in man, form the complete and conscious word of life. The detailed analysis that he makes of them, the syntheses that he constructs with them, are to him as so many images and forecastings of this central divine, of this sun of beauty, of truth, and of life, which he sees not, but which is reflected and bursts upon his vision in countless mirrors. The weapons of the mystic are concentration and inner vision. The weapons of the occultist are intuition and synthesis. Each corresponds to the other. They complete and presuppose each other. These two human types are blended in the adept, in the higher initiate. No doubt one or the other, and often both, are met with in the founders of great religions and the loftiest philosophies. No doubt also they are to be found again, in a less but still very remarkable degree, among a certain number of personages who have played a great part in history as reformers, thinkers, poets, artists, statesmen. Why then should these two types of mind, which represent the highest human faculties and were formerly the subject of universal veneration, usually appear to us now as merely deformed and travestied? Why have they become obliterated? Why should they have fallen into such discredit? That is the result of a profound cause existing in an inevitable necessity of human evolution. During the last 2,000 years, but especially since the 16th century, humanity has achieved a tremendous work, namely the conquest of the globe and the constitution of experimental science in what concerns the material and invisible world. That this gigantic and Herculean task should be successfully accomplished, it was necessary that there should be a temporary eclipse of man's transcendental faculties, so that his whole power of observation might be concentrated on the outer world. These faculties, however, have never been extinct or even inactive. They lay dormant in the mass of men. They remained active in the elect, far from the gaze of the vulgar. Now they are showing themselves openly under new forms. Before long, they will assume a leading and directing importance in human destinies. I would add that at no period of history, whether among the nations of the ancient Aryan cycle or in the Semitic civilizations of Asia and Africa, whether in the Greco-Latin world or in the Middle Ages and in modern times, have these royal faculties, for which positivism would substitute its dreary nomenclature, ever ceased to operate at the beginning and in the background of all great human creations and of all fruitful work. For how can we imagine a thinker, a poet, an inventor, a hero, a master of science or of art, a genius of any kind, without a mighty ray of those two master faculties which make the mystic and the occultist, the inner vision and the sovereign intuition? Rudolf Steiner is both a mystic and an occultist. These two natures appear in him in perfect harmony. One could not say which of the two predominates over the other. In intermingling and blending, they have become one homogeneous force, hence a special development in which outward events play but a secondary part. Dr. Steiner was born in Upper Austria in 1861. His earliest years were passed in a little town situated on the Leitha, on the borders of Styria, the Carpathians, and Hungary. From childhood, his character was serious and concentrated. This was followed by a youth inwardly illuminated by the most marvelous intuitions, a young manhood encountering terrible trials, and a ripe age crowned by a mission which he had dimly foreseen from his earliest years, but which was only gradually formulated in the struggle for truth and life. This youth, passed in a mountainous and secluded region, was happy in its way, thanks to the exceptional faculties that he discovered in himself. He was employed in a Catholic church as a choir boy. The poetry of the worship, the profundity of the symbolism had a mysterious attraction for him. But as he possessed the innate gift of seeing souls, one thing terrified him. This was the secret unbelief of the priests, entirely engrossed in the ritual and the material part of the service. There was another peculiarity. No one, either then or later, allowed himself to talk of any gross superstition in his presence, or to utter any blasphemy, as if those calm and penetrating eyes compelled the speaker to serious thought. In this child, almost always silent, there grew up a quiet and inflexible will to master things through understanding. That was easier for him than for others, for he possessed from the first that self-mastery, so rare even in the adult, which gives the mastery over others. To this firm will was added a warm, deep, and almost painful sympathy, a kind of pitiful tenderness to all beings and even to inanimate nature. It seemed to him that all souls had in them something divine, but in what a stony crust is hidden the shining gold? In what hard rock, in what dark gloom lay dormant the precious essence? Vaguely, as yet did this idea stir within him. He was to develop it later, that the divine soul is present in all men, but in a latent state. It is a sleeping captive that has to be awakened from enchantment. To the sight of this young thinker, human souls became transparent with their troubles, their desires, their paroxysms of hatred or of love, and it was probably owing to the terrible things he saw that he spoke so little. And yet, what delights, unknown to the world, sprang from this involuntary clairvoyance? Among the remarkable inner revelations of this youth, I will instance only one which was extremely characteristic. The vast plains of Hungary, the wild Carpathian forests, the old churches of those mountains in which the monstrance glows brightly as a sun in the darkness of the sanctuary, were not there for nothing, but they were helpful to meditation and contemplation. At 15 years of age, Steiner became acquainted with a herbalist at that time staying in his country. The remarkable thing about this man was that he knew not only the species, families, and life of plants in their minutest details, but also their secret virtues. One would have said that he had spent his life in conversing with the unconscious and fluid soul of herbs and flowers. He had the gift of seeing the vital principle of plants, their etheric body, and what occultism calls the elementals of the vegetable world. He talked of it as of a quite ordinary and natural thing. The calm and coolly scientific tone of his conversation still further excited the curiosity and admiration of the youth. Later on, Steiner knew that this strange man was a messenger from the Master, whom as yet he knew not, but who was to be his real initiator, and who was already watching over him from afar. What the curious, double-sided botanist told him, young Steiner found to be in accordance with the logic of things. That conformed an inner feeling of long standing, and which more and more forced itself on his mind as the fundamental law, and as the basis of the great all. That is to say, the twofold current which constitutes the very movement of the world, and which might be called the flux and reflux of the universal life. We are all witnesses and are conscious of the outward current of evolution, which urges onward all beings of heaven and of earth, stars, plants, animals, and humanity, and causes them to move forward towards an infinite future, without our perceiving the initial force which impels them and makes them go on without pause or rest. But there is in the universe an inverse current, which interposes itself and perpetually breaks in on the other. It is that of involution, by which the principles, forces, entities, and souls, which come from the invisible world and the kingdom of the eternal, infiltrate and ceaselessly intermingle with the visible reality. No evolution of matter would be comprehensible without this occult and astral current, which is the great propeller of life, with its hierarchy of powers. Thus the spirit, which contains the future in germ, involves itself in matter. Thus matter, which receives the spirit, evolves towards the future. While then we are moving on blindly towards the unknown future, this future is approaching us consciously, infusing itself in the current of the world and man who elaborated. Such is the twofold movement of time, the outbreathing and the inbreathing of the soul of the world, which comes from the eternal and returns thither. From the age of 18, young Steiner possessed the spontaneous consciousness of this twofold current, a consciousness which is the condition of all spiritual vision. This vital axiom was forced upon him by a direct and involuntary seeing of things. Thenceforth, he had the unmistakable sensation of occult powers which were working behind and through him for his guidance. He gave heed to this force and obeyed its admonitions, for he felt in profound accordance with it. This kind of perception, however, formed a separate category in his intellectual life. This class of truths seemed to him something so profound, so mysterious, and so sacred, that he never imagined it possible to express it in words. He fed his soul thereon, as from a divine fountain, but to have scattered a drop of it beyond would have seemed to him a profanation. Beside this inner and contemplative life, his rational and philosophic mind was powerfully developing. From 16 to 17 years of age, Rudolf Steiner plunged deeply into the study of Kant, Fichte, and Schelling. When he came to Vienna some years after, he became an ardent admirer of Hegel, whose transcendental idealism borders on occultism. But speculative philosophy did not satisfy him. His positive mind demanded the solid basis of the sciences of observation. So he deeply studied mathematics, chemistry, mineralogy, botany, and zoology. These studies, he said, afford a surer basis for the construction of a spiritual system of the universe than history and literature. The latter, wanting in exact methods, would then throw no sidelights on the vast domain of German science. Inquiring into everything, enamored of high art, and an enthusiast for poetry, Steiner nevertheless did not neglect literary studies. As a guide therein, he found an excellent professor in the person of Julius Schroer, a distinguished scholar of the school of the Brothers Grimm, who strove to develop in his pupils the art of oratory and of composition. To this distinguished man, the young student owed his great and refined literary culture. In the desert of prevailing materialism, says Steiner, his house was to me an oasis of idealism. But this was not yet the master whom he sought. Amidst these varied studies and deep meditations, he could as yet discern the building of the universe, but in a fragmentary way. His inborn intuition prevented any doubt of the divine origin of things and of a spiritual beyond. A distinctive mark of this extraordinary man was that he never knew any of those crises of doubt and despair which usually accompany the transition to a definite conviction in the life of mystics and of thinkers. Nevertheless, he felt that the central light which illumines and penetrates the whole was still lacking in him. He had reached young manhood, with its terrible problems. What was he going to do with his life? The Sphinx of destiny was facing him. How should he solve its problem? It was at the age of 19 that the aspirant to the mysteries met with his guide, the master, so long anticipated. It is an undoubted fact, admitted by occult tradition and confirmed by experience, that those who seek the higher truth from an impersonal motive find a master to initiate them at the right moment, that is to say, when they are ripe for its reception. "Knock, and it shall be opened to you," said Jesus. This is true with regard to everything, but above all with regard to truth. Only, the desire must be ardent as a flame, in a soul pure as crystal. The master of Rudolf Steiner was one of those men of power who live, unknown to the world, under cover of some civil state, to carry out a mission unsuspected by any but their fellows in the brotherhood of self-sacrificing masters. They take no ostensible part in human events. To remain unknown is the condition of their power, but their action is only the more efficacious, for they inspire, prepare, and direct those who will act in the sight of all. In the present instance, the master had no difficulty in completing the first and spontaneous initiation of his disciple. He had only, so to speak, to point out to him his own nature, to arm him with his needful weapons. Clearly did he show him the connection between the official and the secret sciences, between the religious and the spiritual forces which are now contending for the guidance of humanity, the antiquity of the occult tradition which holds the hidden threads of history, which mingles them, separates, and reunites them in the course of ages. Swiftly, he made him clear the successive stages of inner discipline in order to attain conscious and intelligent clairvoyance. In a few months, the disciple learned from oral teaching the depth and incomparable splendor of the esoteric synthesis. Rudolf Steiner had already sketched for himself his intellectual mission: to reunite science and religion, to bring back God into science and nature into religion, thus to refertilize both art and life. But how to set about this vast and daring undertaking? How conquer, or rather, how tame and transform the great enemy, the materialistic science of the day, which is like a terrible dragon covered with its carapace and couched on its huge treasure? How master this dragon of modern science and yoke it to the car of spiritual truth? And above all, how conquer the bull of public opinion? Rudolf Steiner's master was not in the least like himself. He had not that extreme and feminine sensibility which, though not excluding energy, makes every contact and emotion and instantly turns the suffering of others into a personal pain. He was masculine in spirit, a born ruler of men, looking only at the species, and for whom individuals hardly existed. He spared not himself, and he did not spare others. His will was like a ball which, once shot from the cannon's mouth, goes straight to its mark, sweeping off everything in its way. To the anxious questioning of his disciple, he replied in substance, "If thou wouldest fight the enemy, begin by understanding him. Thou wilt conquer the dragon only by penetrating his skin. As to the bull, thou must seize him by the horns. It is in the extremity of distress that thou wilt find thy weapons and thy brothers in the fight. I have shown thee who thou art. Now go, and be thyself. Rudolf Steiner knew the language of the masters well enough to understand the rough path that he was thus commanded to tread, but he also understood that this was the only way to attain the end. He obeyed and set forth. From 1880, the life of Rudolf Steiner becomes divided into three quite distinct periods. From 20 to 30 years of age, 1881 to 1891, the Viennese period, a time of study and of preparation. From 30 to 40, 1891 to 1901, the Weimar period, a time of struggle and combat. From 40 to 46, 1901 to 1907, the Berlin period, a time of action and of organization, in which his thought crystallized into a living work. I passed rapidly over the Vienna period, in which Steiner took the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. He afterwards wrote a series of scientific articles on zoology, geology, and the theory of colors, in which theosophical ideas appear in an idealist clothing. While acting as tutor in several families, with the same conscientious devotion that he gave to everything, he conducted as chief editor a weekly Viennese paper, the Deutsche Wochenschrift. His friendship with the Austrian poetess Marie Eugenie del Grazie cast, as it were, into this period of heavy work a warm ray of sunshine with a smile of grace and poetry. In 1890, Steiner was summoned to collaborate in the archives of Goethe and Schiller at Weimar to superintend the re-editing of Goethe's scientific works. Shortly after, he published two important works, Truth and Science and The Philosophy of Liberty. The occult powers that guided me, he says, forced me to introduce spiritualistic ideas imperceptibly into the current literature of the time. But in these various tasks, he was but studying his ground whilst trying his strength. So distant was the goal that he did not dream of being able to reach it as yet. To travel round the world in a sailing vessel, to cross the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian Ocean, in order to return to a European port, would have seemed easier to him. While awaiting the events that would allow him to equip his ship and to launch it on the open sea, he came into touch with two illustrious personalities who helped to determine his intellectual position in the contemporary world. These two persons were the celebrated philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and the no less famous naturalist Ernst Haeckel. Rudolf Steiner had just written an impartial treatise on the author of Zarathustra. In consequence of this, Nietzsche's sister begged the sympathetic critic to come and see her at Nuremberg, where her unhappy brother was slowly dying. Madame Forster took the visitor to the door of the apartment where Nietzsche was lying on a couch in a comatose condition, inert, stupefied. To Steiner, there was something very significant in this melancholy sight. In it, he saw the final act in the tragedy of the would-be Superman. Nietzsche, the author of Beyond Good and Evil, had not, like the realists of Bismarckian imperialism, renounced idealism, for he was naturally intuitive. But in his individualistic pride, he sought to cut off the spiritual world from the universe and the divine from human consciousness. Instead of placing the Superman, of whom he had a poetic vision, in the spiritual kingdom, which is his true sphere, he strove to force him into the material world, which alone was real in his eyes. Hence, in that splendid intellect arose a chaos of ideas and a wild struggle, which finally brought on the softening of the brain. To explain this particular case, it is needless to bring into atavism, or the theory of degeneracy, the frenzied combat of ideas and of contradictory sentiments, of which this brain was the battlefield, was enough. Steiner had done justice to all the genius that marked the innovating ideas of Nietzsche, but this victim of pride, self-destroyed by negation, was to him nonetheless a tragic instance of the ruin of a mighty intellect which madly destroys itself in breaking away from spiritual intelligence. Madame Forster did her utmost to enroll Dr. Steiner under her brother's flag. For this, she used all her skill, making repeated offers to the young publicist to become editor and commentator of Nietzsche's works. Steiner withstood her insistence as best he could, and ended by taking himself off altogether, for which Madame Forster never forgave him. She did not know that Rudolf Steiner bore within him the consciousness of a work no less great and more valuable than that of her brother. Nietzsche had been merely an interesting episode in the life of the esoteric thinker on the threshold of his battlefield. His meeting with the celebrated naturalist Ernst Haeckel, on the contrary, marks a most important phase in the development of his thought. Was not the successor of Darwin apparently the most formidable adversary of the spiritualism of this young initiate, of that philosophy which to him was the very essence of his being and the breath of his thought? Indeed, since the broken link between man and animal has been rejoined, since man can no longer believe in a special and supernatural origin, he has begun altogether to doubt his divine origin and destiny. He no longer sees himself as anything but one phenomenon among so many phenomena, a passing form amidst so many forms, a frail and chance link in a blind evolution. Steiner, then, is right in saying, "The mentality deduced from natural sciences is the greatest power of modern times." On the other hand, he knew that this system merely reproduces a succession of external forms among living beings, and not the inner and acting forces of life. He knew it from personal initiation and a deeper and vaster view of the universe. So also he could exclaim with more assurance than most of our timid spiritualists and startled theologians, "Is the human soul, then, to rise on the wings of enthusiasm to the summits of the true, the beautiful, and the good, only to be swept away into nothingness like a bubble of the brain?" Yes, Haeckel was the adversary. It was materialism in arms, the dragon with all his scales, his claws, and his teeth. Steiner's desire to understand this man, and to do him justice as to all that was great in him, to fathom his theory so far as it was logical and plausible, was only the more intense. In this fact, one sees all the loyalty and all the greatness of his comprehensive mind. The materialistic conclusions of Haeckel could have no influence on his own ideas, which came to him from a different science, but he had a presentiment that in the indisputable discoveries of the naturalist he should find the surest basis of an evolutionary spiritualism and a rational theosophy. He began then to study eagerly the history of natural creation. In it, Haeckel gives a fascinating picture of the evolution of species, from the amoeba to man. In it, he shows the successive growth of organs and the physiological process by which living beings have raised themselves to organisms more and more complex and more perfect. But in this stupendous transformation, which implies millions and millions of years, he never explains the initial force of this universal ascent, nor the series of special impulses which cause beings to rise step by step. To these primordial questions, Haeckel has never been able to reply except by admitting spontaneous generation, which is tantamount to a miracle as great as the creation of man by God from a clod of earth. To a theosophist like Steiner, on the other hand, the cosmic force which elaborates the world comprises in its spheres, fitted one into another, the myriads of souls which crystallize and incarnate ceaselessly in all beings. He, who saw the underside of creation, could but recognize and admire the extent of the all-round gaze which Haeckel surveyed as his above. It was in vain that the naturalist would deny the divine author of the universal scheme. He proved it in spite of himself, in so well describing his work. As to the theosophist, he greeted, in the surging of species and in the breath which urges them onward, man in the making, the very thought of God, the visible expression of the planetary word. While thus pursuing his studies, Rudolf Steiner recalled the saying of his master, "To conquer the dragon, his skin must be penetrated." While stealing within the carapace of present-day materialism, he had seized his weapons. Henceforth he was ready for the combat. He needed but a field of action to give battle, and a powerful aid to uphold him therein. He was to find his field in the Theosophical Society, and his aid in a remarkable woman. In 1897, Rudolf Steiner went to Berlin to conduct a literary magazine and to give lectures there. On his arrival, he found there a branch of the Theosophical Society. The German branch of this society was always noted for its great independence, which is natural in a country of transcendental philosophy and of fastidious criticism. It had already made a considerable contribution to occult literature through the interesting periodical The Sphinx, conducted by Dr. Hube Schleiden, and Dr. Karl Duprell's book, Philosophie der Mystik. But the leaders having retired, it was almost over with the group. Great discussions and petty wranglings divided the theosophists beyond the Rhine. Should Rudolf Steiner enter the Theosophical Society? This question forced itself urgently upon him, and it was of the utmost gravity, both for himself and for his cause. Through his first master, through the brotherhood with which he was associated, and by his own innermost nature, Steiner belongs to another school of occultism. I mean to the esoteric Christianity of the West, and most especially to the Rosicrucian initiation. After mature consideration, he resolved to join the Theosophical Society, of which he became a member in 1902. He did not, however, enter it as a pupil of the Eastern tradition, but as an initiate of Rosicrucian esotericism, who gladly recognized the profound depth of the Hindu wisdom and offered it to a brotherly hand to make a magnetic link between the two. He understood that the two traditions were not meant to contend with each other, but to act in concert with complete independence, and thus to work for the common good of civilization. The Hindu tradition, in fact, contains the greatest treasure of occult science as regards cosmogony and the prehistoric periods of humanity, while the tradition of Christian and Western esotericism looks from its immeasurable height upon the far-off future and the final destinies of our race. For the past contains and prepares the future, as the future issues from the past and completes it. Rudolf Steiner was assisted in his work by a powerful recruit and one of inestimable value in the propagandist work that he was about to undertake, Marie von Sievers, a Russian by birth and of an unusually varied cosmopolitan education. She writes and speaks Russian, French, German, and English equally well, had herself also reached theosophy by other roads, after long seeking for the truth which illumines all because it illumines the very depths of our own being. The extreme refinement of her aristocratic nature, at once modest and proud, her great and delicate sensitiveness, the extent and balance of her intelligence, her artistic and mental endowments, all made her wonderfully fitted for the part of an agent and an apostle. The Oriental theosophy had attracted and delighted her without altogether convincing her. The lectures of Dr. Steiner gave her the light which convinces by casting its beams on all sides, as from a transplendent center. Independent and free, she, like many Russians in good society, sought for some ideal work to which she could devote all her energies. She had found it. Dr. Steiner, having been appointed General Secretary of the German section of the Theosophical Society, Marie von Sievers became an assistant. From that time, in spreading the work throughout Germany and the adjacent countries, she displayed a real genius for organization, maintained with unwearied activity. As for Rudolf Steiner, he had already given ample proof of his profound thought and his eloquence. He knew himself, and he was master of himself. But such faith, such devotion, must have increased his energy 100-fold and given wings to his words. His writings on esoteric questions followed one another in rapid succession. He delivered lectures in Berlin, Leipzig, Kassel, Munich, Stuttgart, Vienna, Budapest, etc. All his books are of a high standard. He is equally skilled in the deduction of ideas in philosophical order and in rigorous analysis of scientific facts, and when he so chooses, he can give a poetical form to his thought, in original and striking imagery, but his whole self is shown only by his presence and his speech, private or public. The characteristic of his eloquence is a singular force, always gentle in expression, resulting undoubtedly from perfect serenity of soul, combined with wonderful clearness of mind. Added to this at times is an inner and mysterious vibration, which makes itself felt by the listener from the very first words. Never a word that could shock or jar. From argument to argument, from analogy to analogy, he leads you on from the known to the unknown. Whether following up the comparative development of the earth and of man, according to the occult tradition, through the Lemurian, Atlantean, Asiatic, and European periods, whether explaining the physiological and psychic constitution of man as he is now, whether enumerating the stages of Rosicrucian initiation, or commenting on the Gospel of St. John and the Apocalypse, or applying his root ideas to mythology, history, and literature, that which dominates and guides his discourse is ever this power of synthesis, which coordinates facts under one ruling idea and gathers them together in one harmonious vision. And it is ever this inward and contagious fervor, this secret music of the soul, which is, as it were, a subtle melody in harmony with the universal soul. Such, at least, is what I felt on first meeting him, and listening to him 2 years ago. I could not better describe this undefinable feeling than by recalling the saying of a poet friend to whom I was showing the portrait of the German theosophist. Standing before those deep and clear-seeing eyes, before that countenance hollowed by inward struggles, molded by a lofty spirit which has proved its balance on the heights and its calm in the depths, my friend exclaimed, "Behold, a master of himself and of life." 1. The superphysical world and its gnosis. In this practical age, and because of the many various claims of the day, it is but natural that people, who hear of transcendentalism, should at once ask the question, how may we for ourselves know the truth of such statements? Indeed, it is noticeable, as a characteristic of the majority, that they will accept nothing on faith, or mere authority, but wish rather to rely entirely upon their own judgment. Therefore, when a mystic undertakes to explain something of the superphysical nature of man, and the destiny of the human soul and spirit before birth and after death, he is at once confronted with that fundamental demand. Such doctrine they seem to think is important only when you have shown them the way by which they may convince themselves of its truth. This critical inquiry is quite justified, and no true mystic or occultist will dispute its fairness. Yet it is unfortunate that with many who make the demand, there exists a feeling of skepticism or antagonism toward the mystic or any attempt on his part to explain anything occult. This feeling becomes especially marked when the mystic intimates how the truths which he has described may be attained. For they say, whatever is true may be demonstrated. Therefore, prove to us what you assert. They demand that the truth must be something clear and simple, something which an ordinary intellect may comprehend. Surely, they add, this knowledge cannot be the possession of a chosen few, to whom it is given by a special revelation. And in this way, the real messenger of transcendental truth is frequently confronted with people who reject him, because, unlike the scientist, for example, he can produce no proofs for his assertions, of such a nature as they are able to understand. Again, there are those who cautiously reject any information pertaining to the superphysical, because to them it does not seem reasonable. Thereupon they partially satisfy themselves by claiming that we cannot know anything of what lies beyond birth or death, or of anything which cannot be perceived through our 5 ordinary physical senses. These are but a few of the arguments and criticisms with which today the messenger of a spiritual philosophy is confronted, but they are similar to all those which compose the keynote of our time, and he who puts himself at the service of a spiritual movement must recognize this condition quite clearly. For his own part, the mystic is aware that his knowledge rests upon superphysical facts, which to him are just as tangible, for example, as those that form the foundation of the experiences and observations described by a traveler in Africa or any strange land. To the mystic applies what Annie Besant has said in her manual, Death and After. A seasoned African explorer would care but little for the criticisms passed on his report by persons who had never been there. He might tell what he saw, describe the animals whose habits he had studied, sketch the country he had traversed, sum up its products and its characteristics. If he was contradicted, laughed at, set right by untraveled critics, he would be neither ruffled nor distressed, but would merely leave them alone. Ignorance cannot convince knowledge by repeated asseveration of its nescience. The opinion of 100 persons on a subject of which they are wholly ignorant is of no more weight than the opinion of one such person. Evidence is strengthened by many consenting witnesses, testifying each to his knowledge of a fact, but nothing multiplied 1,000 times remains nothing. Here is expressed the mystic's view of his own situation. He hears the objections which are raised on every side, yet he knows that for himself he has no need to dispute them. He realizes that his certain knowledge is being criticized by those who have not had his experience, that he is in the position of a mathematician who has discovered a truth which can lose no value, though 1,000 voices are raised in opposition. Then again will arise the objection of the skeptics. Mathematical truths may be proven to anyone, they will say, and though perhaps you have really found something, we shall accept it only when we have learned of its truth through our own investigation. Such then have reason to consider themselves to be in the right, because it is clear to them that anyone who acquires the necessary knowledge can prove a mathematical truth, while the experiences professed by the mystic, if true, depend upon the special faculties of a few elect mystics, in whom they assume they are expected to blindly believe. For him who rightly considers this objection, all justification for the doubt immediately vanishes, and mystics can here use the very logical reasoning of the skeptics themselves, by emphasizing the truth that the way to higher knowledge is open to anyone who will acquire for himself the faculties by which he may prove the spiritual truths herein claimed. The mystic asserts nothing which his opponents would not also be compelled to assert, if they did but fully comprehend their own statements. They, however, in making an assertion, often formulate a claim which constitutes a direct contradiction of that assertion. Skeptics are seldom willing to acquire the necessary faculties to test the assertions of the mystic, but prefer to judge him offhand, without regard to their own lack of qualification. The sincere mystic says to them, "I do not claim to be chosen in the sense that you mean. I have merely developed within myself some of man's additional senses in order to acquire the faculties through which it is possible to speak of glimpses into these superphysical regions. These senses are dormant within you and every other person until they are developed, as is necessary with the usual senses and faculties more noticeable in the growth of a child." Yet his opponents answer, "You must prove your truths to us as we now are." This at once appears a difficult task, for they have not complied with the necessity of developing the dormant powers within them. They are still unwilling to do so, and yet they insist that he shall give them proofs. Nor do they see that this is exactly as if a peasant at his plow should demand of the mathematician the proof of a complicated problem, without his undergoing the trouble of learning mathematics. This mixed mental condition appears to be so general, and its solution so simple, that one almost hesitates to speak of it, and yet it indicates a delusion under which millions of people continue living at the present time. When explained to them, they always agree in theory, since it is quite as plain as that 2 and 2 make 4, yet in practice they continually act in contradiction. The mistake has grown to be second nature with many. They indulge it without realizing that they do so without desiring to be convinced of its error, just as they set themselves against other laws which they should and would at times recognize as embodying a principle of the simplest nature, if they but give it an unbiased consideration. It matters not whether the mystic of today moves among thinking artisans or in a more educated circle. Wherever he goes, he meets with the same prejudice, the same self-contradiction. One finds it in popular lectures, in the newspapers and magazines, and even the more learned works or treatises. Here we must recognize quite clearly that we are dealing with a consensus of opinion that amounts to a sign of the times, which we may not simply pronounce as incompetent, nor deal with as possibly a correct but unjust criticism. We must understand that this prejudice against the higher truths lies deep in the very being of our age. We must understand clearly that the great successes, the immense advance marking our time, necessarily encourages this condition. The 19th century especially had in the above respect a dark side to its wonderful excellences. Its greatness rests upon discoveries in the external world and conquest of natural forces for technical and industrial purposes. These successes could have been attained only by the employment of the mind directed toward material results. The civilization of the present day is the result of the training of our senses and of that part of our mind which is occupied with the world of sense. Almost every step we take in the busy marts of today show us how much we owe to this kind of training, and it is under the influence of these blessings of civilization that the habits of thought prevalent among our fellow men have been developed. They continue to abide by the senses and the mind, because it is by means of these that they have grown great. People were taught to train themselves to admit nothing as true except those things that were presented to them by the senses or the intellect, and nothing is more apt to claim for itself the only valid testimony, the only absolute authority, than the mind or the senses. If a man has acquired by means of them a certain degree of culture, he thenceforth accustoms himself to submit everything to their consideration, everything to their criticism. And again, in another sphere, in the domain of social life, we find a similar trait. The man of the 19th century insisted, in the fullest sense of the word, upon the absolute freedom of personality, and repudiated any authority in the social commonwealth. He endeavored to construct the community in such a way that the full independence, the self-chosen vocation of each individual should, without interference, be assured. In this way it became habitual for him to consider everything from the standpoint of the average individual. This same individuality is also helpful in the search of knowledge on the spiritual plane, for the higher powers which lie dormant in the soul may be developed by one person in this direction, by another in that. One will make more progress, another less. But when they develop those powers and attach value to them, men begin to differentiate themselves. And then one must allow, to the advanced student, more right to speak on the subject, or to act in a certain way, than to another who is less advanced. This is more essential in matters of the higher realm than on the plane of the senses and the mind, where experiences are more nearly the same. It is also noticeable that the present formation of the social commonwealth has helped to bring about a revolt against the higher powers of man. According to the mystic, civilization during the 19th century has moved altogether along physical lines, and people have accustomed themselves to move on the physical plane alone, and to feel at home there. The higher powers are developed only on planes higher than the physical, and the knowledge which these faculties bring is, therefore, unknown to the physical man. It is only necessary to attend mass meetings if one wishes to be convinced of the fact that the speakers there are totally unable to think any thoughts but those which refer to the physical plane, the world of sense. This can also be seen through the leading journalists of our papers and magazines, and indeed, on all sides one may observe the haughtiest and most complete denial of everything that cannot be seen with the eyes, or felt with the hands, or comprehended by the average mind. We do not condemn this attitude, for it denotes a necessary stage in the development of humanity. Without the pride and prejudices of mind and sense, we should never have achieved our greatest conquests over material life, nor have been able to impart to the personality a certain measure of elasticity. Neither can we hope that many ideals, which must be founded on man's desire for freedom and the assertion of personality, may yet be realized. But this dark side of a purely materialistic civilization has deeply affected the whole being of the modern man. For proof, it is not necessary to refer to the obvious facts already named. It would be easy to demonstrate, by certain examples, which are greatly underrated, especially today, how deeply rooted in the mind of the modern man is this adhesion to the testimony of the senses, or the average intelligence. And it is just these things that indicate the need for the renewal of spiritual life. The strong response evoked by Professor Friedrich Delitzsch's Babel and Bible theory fully justifies a reference to its author's method of thinking as a sign of the time. Professor Delitzsch has demonstrated the relationship of certain traditions in the Old Testament to the Babylonian accounts of the creation, and this fact, coming from such a source and in such a form, has been realized by many who would otherwise have ignored such questions. It has led many to reconsider the so-called idea of revelation. They ask themselves, how is it possible to accept the idea that the contents of the Old Testament were revealed by God, when we find very similar conceptions among decidedly heathen nations? This problem cannot here be further discussed. Delitzsch found many opponents who feared that, through his exposition, the very foundations of religion had been shaken. He has defended himself in a pamphlet, Babel and a Bible, a retrospect and a forecast. Here we shall only refer to a single statement in the pamphlet, one of importance, because it reveals the view of an eminent scientist regarding the position of man with respect to transcendental truths. And today, innumerable other people think and feel just like Delitzsch. The statement affords an excellent opportunity for us to find out what is the innermost conviction of our contemporaries, expressed quite freely, and therefore in its truest form. Delitzsch turns to those who reproach him with a somewhat liberal use of the term revelation, and who would fain regard it as a kind of old priestly wisdom, which has nothing at all to do with the layman, making this reply: For my part, I am of opinion that while our children or ourselves are instructed in school or at church as regards revelation, not only are we within our right, but it is our duty to think independently concerning these deep questions, possessing also, as they do, an eminently practical side, were it only that we might avoid giving our children evasive answers. For this very reason, it will be gratifying to many searchers after truth when the dogma of a special choosing of Israel shall have been brought forward into the light of a wider historical outlook through the union of Babylonian, Assyrian, and Old Testament research. A few pages earlier, we are shown the direction of such thoughts. For the rest, it would seem to me that the only logical thing is for church and school to be satisfied as regards the whole past history of the world and of humanity with the belief in one almighty creator of heaven and earth, and that these tales of the Old Testament should be classified by themselves under some such title as Old Hebraic Myths. It may be taken as a matter of course, we suppose, that no one will see in the following remarks an attack on the investigator Delitzsch. What then is here arrived in naive simplicity? Nothing less than that the mind which is engaged upon physical investigation may assert the right of judging experiences of superphysical nature. There is no thought that this mind without further development may perhaps be unfit to reflect upon the teachings of these revelations. When one wishes to understand that which appears as a revelation, one must employ the kind of knowledge or forces through which the revelation itself has come to us. He who develops within himself the mystical power of perception soon observes that in certain stories of the Old Testament, which by Delitzsch were called Old Hebraic Myths, there are revealed to him truths of a higher nature than those which may be comprehended by the intellect, which is only concerned with the things of sense. His own experiences will lead him to see that these myths have proceeded out of a mystic perception of transcendental truths, and then, in one illuminative moment, his whole point of view is changed. As little as one may demonstrate the fallacy of a mathematical problem by discovering who solved it first, or even that several people have solved it, just so little may one impugn the truth of a biblical narrative by the discovery of a similar story elsewhere. Instead of demanding that everyone should insist upon his right, or even his duty, to think independently on the so-called revelations, we ought rather to consider that only he who has developed in himself those latent powers which make it possible for him to relive that which was once realized by those very mystics who proclaim the supersensuous revelations, has a right to decide anything about the matter. Here we have an excellent example of how the average intellect, qualified for the highest triumphs in practical sense knowledge, sets itself up, in naive pride, as a judge in domains, the existence of which it does not even care to know, for purely historical investigation is also carried on by nothing but the experience of the senses. In just the same way has the investigator of the New Testament led us into a blind alley. At any costs, the method of the newer historical investigation had to be directed upon the Gospels. These documents have been compared with each other and brought into relation with all sorts of records, in order that we might find out what really happened in Palestine from the year 1 to the year 33, how the historical personality of whom they tell really lived, and what he may really have said. Angelus Silesius of the 17th century has already expressed the whole of the critical attitude toward this kind of investigation. Though Christ were yearly born in Bethlehem, and never had birth in you yourself, then were you lost forever. And if within yourself it is not reared again, the cross at Golgotha can save you not from pain. Nor are these words of one who doubted, but those of a Christian, strong in his belief, and his equally fervent predecessor, Meister Eckhart, said in the 13th century, "There are some who desire to see God with their eyes, as they look at a cow, and just as they love a cow, so they desire to love God. Simple-minded people imagine that God may be seen as if he stood there, and they stood here. But this is not so. In that perception, God and I are one." These words must not be understood as directed against the investigation of historical truth. Yet no one can rightly understand the historical truth of such documents as the Gospels, unless he has first experienced within himself the mystical meaning which they contain. All such comparisons and analyses are quite worthless, for no one can discover who was born in Bethlehem, but he who has mystically experienced the Christ within himself. Neither can anyone in whom it has not already been erected decide how it is that the cross at Golgotha can deliver us from pain. purely historical investigation can discover no more concerning the mystic reality than the dismembering anatomist perhaps can discover the secret of a great poetical genius. See my book, Das Christentum als Mystik.